right, welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and I am assembled with fellow biblical creationists Matt Nailor and Matt Powell. Tonight, we are demolishing evolution. We're not talking change over time. We're talking that type of evolution that says whales and strawberries are related through common ancestry. We are also going to be confirming creation. Gentlemen, it's great to have you here, but before we get started, I do want to make sure that we don't have anybody here on our creationist assemble panel who believe they are related to strawberries, cows, and of course grasses. Gentlemen, after all these years of apologetics, you guys don't now believe that you're related to strawberries, cows, and grasses, do you?
No, although the hair on my arm looks like grass.
Right.
Yeah.
Look at those. Look at that homology right there.
There we go.
How about everything coming from nothing? Brother Matt Powell, you've done a lot of great work on the Big Bang, or should we say the Big Dud? Do they teach that all matter and energy was at one point in a dot, no bigger than the period on a page?
Yeah, interestingly enough, they do deny it many times, but they all do pretty much accept that ultimately that everything was condensed into an infinitely dense hot point, exploded from there, and created all of what we see, which to me just does not make any sense at all. I've interviewed college students and they would agree it doesn't really make sense. Even a lot of scientists now are coming out against the Big Bang.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I've seen your videos, brother, that you're putting out on your channel, Matt Powell Official, where you're going to the universities and chatting with skeptics, all types of people of different views, as a matter of fact, and asking them these important origins related questions. Matt, have you been seeing some success in that?
Very much so. And I would say that we have been finding that a lot of college students are not even believing in evolution anymore. A lot of them are now starting to open their eyes to biblical creationism. It's pretty amazing. And in fact, there was a group of college students, I think 5 or 6 of them, that were all Christians. And I walked up to them on camera and actually pretended to be an atheist. And I was challenging them on creationism, and they were giving solid answers to what Darwinian evolution actually espouses. I was literally showing them the articles on my phone, showing them that, yes, you owe your life to a rock, them claiming as Darwinists that we came from a rock. And I was trying to make them feel ridiculous for believing in God and not believing that we descended from a fish. And so they did amazing defending the faith. And I thought that that was a great interaction. So there's a lot of people in colleges across America that are waking up to the reality that we did not descend from fish, sea sponges, and so forth.
Right. Open-minded, objective thinking people. Those are the kinds of people you come across with in your everyday personal life. Here on YouTube, we battle and duke it out with some militant atheist revolutionists where they have a lot of investment in this science fiction religion, because that's exactly what it is. And again, we are going to be comprehensive tonight in our dismantling of evolution and confirming creation. And so, Matt Powell, it's great to have you here. I've got your channel linked for people to check out. Matt Nailor, my ministry partner. What's going on, brother? Great to have you as well. I know you've been working overtime, no sleep for you over the last couple of weeks, gathering images and getting ready for tonight's All Things Creation and Evolution event. So how are you doing tonight, Matt? Matt 1 and Matt 2.
Yeah, doing good. Yeah, I like visuals for people. I like making images so it's more entertaining than just sitting here looking at me talking at a microphone. So lots of visuals tonight on lots of subjects. So
that's good. Well, we've got, for the audience sake, we've got a few presentations, one from Brother Matt Powell, one from myself, one from Brother Matt Nailor. Matt's going to be hot off the press. You're going to be discussing dinosaurs, creation, related topics. I have a presentation on genetics and how genetics has discovered Adam, Eve, and Genesis. And Matt Nailor has a little bit of everything. in terms of dismantling evolution and confirming creation. And so, gentlemen, why don't we just get right into our presentations? And immediately following the presentations, we will be engaging and interacting with our live audience, taking questions, answering objections, engaging challenges. And so for those in the live chat, if you do have any rebuttals or counters to anything we're saying in terms of our talks here on all things creation and evolution, send those in. I'll save them. We'll have some fun interacting with them. Okay, Matt Powell, I am very excited to have to present for us. It is refreshing that we don't have anyone on the panel who believes they're related to strawberries, whales, and grass. As a matter of fact, we are going to be dismantling that idea as evolutionists. They have big imaginations, don't they, gentlemen? They hope, dream, and imagine. Matt Powell, we're going to hand it to you, brother. You just let me know when you'd like me to share your screen, and we'll give you the floor. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Still
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. So yeah, it is good to be here, folks. And Donny and Matt and Matt Nailor, we go way back, and we definitely are. It's a blessing to hang out together and be a part of this live stream here tonight. I'm actually going to tread some ground that I've never treaded before, so if you guys would bear with me. I do have a PowerPoint here. Whenever you're ready, Donny, feel free to just share my screen if you're able.
Okay. Yeah, you're good to go.
Yeah, and today we're actually going to talk about dinosaurs, because I don't know about you guys, but I've seen a lot of people online saying that dinosaurs never existed from the creationist world. And I wouldn't even really consider them creationists. I would consider people who think that total conspiracists, they did exist. But then there's also people who claim that they did exist, but it was millions of years ago. I also want to take and correct that and just kind of set the record straight. So today we're just going to talk briefly about dinosaurs and man. What's a good perspective to take? Well, the mainstream is that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. And if you notice these children's books.
On my end, it's just showing our, are you in your slides or?
You know what? It might have frozen on you. Let me do this.
See here.
Yeah, it looks like it froze.
I think if you, did you click entire screen?
Yeah, I did, but let me do this. Let me just go present, share screen. Yeah, let's do a window, and we'll just try the window itself. How about that?
Oh, there we go. It says children's books regarding dinosaurs.
There we go. All right.
You're good to go.
Perfect. As I was saying, dinosaurs and man. All right. Slide number 2 here. So children's books regarding dinosaurs. Obviously, the mainstream is that dinosaurs existed millions of years ago, that a human has never seen a dinosaur. A lot of people espouse that. And you can see these kids' books that kids often read about, I can read about dinosaurs, and so on and so forth. This one starts out by saying millions of years ago. So before kids have even hit kindergarten, they are already getting indoctrinated. Somebody is also already trying to prove evolution to them, or at least suggest that it's true. Notice this book right here. Millions of years ago, huge dinosaurs walked the earth. They were the biggest animals that ever lived on land. Ultrasaurus may have been bigger than a 5-story building. Again, in Dr. Seuss, we see that they suggest that millions of years ago, the dinosaurs existed. Well, is that possible? Well, here's from a modern day atheist who says, dinosaurs were my gateway drug to atheism. And while I was still 6 or 7 years away from reaching the conclusion that God
Matt,
either didn't.
Sorry to stop you, brother. It's still on the, it's moving now. It's moving now.
It adjusted. Whatever.
So there must be like a delay.
It's delayed. Yep. Oh, man.
Because I think does it let you go full screen at all?
Let me do this. Let me try full screen like this.
No, so I think because that usually is the case, no worries. When you share just a tab rather than entire screen, for some reason, the StreamYard doesn't let you put it full screen. I'm not sure why. So, but it is moving now. Like currently we're on the quote here with the T-Rex picture.
Let me just try to like do this here. Play around with this a little bit.
Praise I Am, our team technician, said go to view. Does that make sense? Go to view. Is there a part there that says
Yeah.
view?
We'll do outline view, perhaps. And then maybe we could like blow this up.
He said go to view and then click something called present slides.
Okay.
Because I think he usually just clicks the share tab as well. It's more specific when you click the share tab. Entire screen kind of lets you do anything.
So what we'll do here, let me try this. I'm going to hit share screen. We're going to go with entire screen. We're going to hit share.
As our brother Kent would say, things are supposed to get better on their own, right? According to evolution.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Looks good.
I guess maybe
The slides have evolved.
Yeah. There we go. Dr. Kent Hovind was right, I guess. All right. So dinosaurs were my gateway drug to atheism, this guy says. And while I was still 6 or 7 years away from reaching the conclusion that God either didn't care about us or that he didn't exist, the dinosaurs had shared an important secret that the Bible can be wrong. And so what I'm seeing online, and I don't know about you, Donny or Matt, but most of the time when people come out atheist, one of the common denominators is that the dinosaurs had something to do with it. And they will say, yes, I read such and such article about how dinosaurs existed millions of years ago, therefore Christianity is false, the Bible's not true. And yes, I mean, scientists do claim for the most part that dinosaurs existed and that they died out 65 plus million years ago. But I'd like to look at some forensic evidence, because I think that if we actually cross-reference pieces of material, we can actually discover what the truth is. And is it still working well so far?
Yes.
Okay,
Looks great.
awesome. First thing is one of the most common things that we find in dinosaur bones, which is soft tissue. We find blood cells, hemoglobin inside of the blood, bone cells, nerve cells. Look at this. Mary Schweitzer said that she got goosebumps, and it was actually like looking at a modern slice of bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. She says the bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? Now, I think the real question they should be asking is, did these blood cells actually last that long, or were they from that long ago? Check this out. We find blood cells in a Triceratops rib. I thought that this was pretty interesting here, that they have peer-reviewed 16 types of bioorganic materials that are found in dinosaur bones. They have cross-referenced each other as scientists to ensure accuracy. And I think of the fact that we find collagen in dinosaur bones. Collagen is the soft material that's inside of our bones, and it degrades quickly after we die. Well, check this out. Dinosaur surprise. Scientists find collagen inside of a 195 million year old bone. For now, scientists are still trying to figure out how these protein fragments really managed to last so long in the first place. Well, this suggests that dinosaurs did not exist millions of years ago, and that the Bible was actually true when it told us that Behemoth, the dinosaurs, walked with man. They were created alongside of mankind. Look at this, duck-billed dinosaur skin preserved in Alberta, Canada. We find it all over the world. We find dinosaur graves in the center of the United States that contain nerves from dinosaur bone cells. I mean, it is from bones of dinosaurs. It is just incredible. And you can even Google how long can nerve cells last after an organism dies. And it says here in the highlighted section that they do not survive for any significant period after an organism dies. And so is it plausible to suggest that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago and that they died out during those prehistoric ages, when we're finding evidence to the contrary? We're actually finding materials that suggest, and that actually I would argue prove, that they did live recently. We find C14 inside of dinosaur bones. Think of this. A lot of evolutionists will say that C14 contaminated the bones. Well, if the bones are getting contaminated from C14, why is the blood cells still existing in certain of the bones? the blood cells would have been degraded if it had been contaminated by C14. So they can't have their cake and eat it too on this point. Preserved bone cells, you can see close-ups from a Stegosaurus. This I found almost unbelievable. We find this dinosaur called Skippy. He's supposedly 113 million years old, but these organs on him were not fossilized. He had an intestines that were intact, a colon intact, liver, muscles, and a windpipe intact. That to me is incredible. How in the world did this survive in deep time? How? It's not possible. Darwinian evolution is impossible just based on the fact that dinosaurs must have been existing in the recent past. They must have existed within a reasonably recent time in order for these materials to have not degraded. Check out this nodosaur that we found. It still had, even though it was mummified, it still had intestines that were inside of it that were unfossilized. How is that possible? I mean, it just to me is a checkmate to Darwinian evolution. Think of finding a bunch of ice inside of a desert. It just wouldn't make sense. Or like an ice cream cone in the desert. It just wouldn't make sense. And if evolution were true, then this material that we're finding inside of these dinosaurs just simply would not exist. It would have degraded into non-existence. All right, let's talk about dinosaurs to birds. Now, I'm sure, Donny, that you and Matt have both heard that dinosaurs actually did not die out, that they evolved into birds. And you can even see here in a kid's book, are chickens related to the T-Rex? The answer says yes. Science has revealed compelling evidence that the T-Rex actually evolved into a chicken. I get that this may not be the mainstream theory, but this is one of the books that's given to children. And children do believe oftentimes that T-Rexes turned into chickens. It is ludicrous. I mean, it's just flat out impossible because scales do not really code for feathers. But I thought this was kind of funny. I saw this on Facebook, thought I would share it. The evolution of chicken nuggets. You have dinosaurs that evolved to chickens, chickens that get chopped up and prepared as meat. The meat gets turned back into dinosaur nuggets, and therefore it is Kentucky Fried Dinosaur that we're really eating from. Incredible. I find it interesting that Darwinists will even admit that dinosaurs probably did not have feathers. Check this out from Smithsonian, and this is not a creationist source. They say that T-Rex was likely covered in scales, not feathers. But we're supposed to believe that dinosaurs grew feathers at some point, and dinosaurs even had feathers in their early existence, and that they evolved into birds. Ludicrous. Smithsonian even will tell us and show us in this 2017 paper that it's more likely that they were covered in scales instead of feathers. And you may ask, well, how did the dinosaurs go extinct? There's a lot of theories on this. Most famous one would be that dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid. Well, I would ask, what about all the other organisms? I mean, is that really plausible that it would just wipe out large dinosaurs and not everything else on the planet? Dinosaurs killed by starvation. Dinosaurs killed by overeating. Yum, yum. Dinosaurs killed by disease. I mean, these are all theories that people come up with and that Darwinian evolutionists will espouse. This one blew my mind. I thought it was actually fake when I saw it. Dinosaurs killed by caterpillars. Basically, the theory is that caterpillars overtook the dinosaurs by eating all of the green leafy material, and therefore the dinosaurs ran out of food and they weren't able to survive, so they died from the butterflies and caterpillars. Theory comes from a California scientist, Stanley Flanders, who has made his living as an entomologist, an insect man, which is perhaps why in 1962 he wrote a paper called "Did the Caterpillar Exterminate the Giant Reptile?" Dr. Flanders proposed that the great dinosaurs were eliminated by a giant influx of moths and butterflies. Dinosaurs killed by flatulates. Dinosaurs gassed themselves into extinction. I know most Darwinian evolutionists would never believe that. A lot of them do, though. And I have asked certain people point blank, do you believe this? And they will say, yes, I have film footage of people saying they believe it. So when atheists come along and say, nobody thinks that, that's just a headline of a news article that's misrepresenting the source, the actual peer-reviewed paper, well, even if that's the case, they're still wrong because people still believe that dinosaurs farted themselves to death. I've seen a lot of people say that. And on YouTube, you can see a lot of people assert that. So it's a lie when they say nobody believes it, because there's a lot of people who do believe that. But in 2010, this article came out by Steve Connor, Mystery Solved, Why the Dinosaurs Died. And so they ultimately claim that it was an asteroid, like I said, the most famous extinction theory. But is that really plausible to suggest that an asteroid that struck 2,000 miles away from the heart of where most of the dinosaurs are found in the center of the United States is what caused their death, caused a dust storm to come and overtake them and kill them? Is that reasonable? In the center of the United States, we find hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur graveyards, and each one of these dots that you can see, if you can see my screen, represents a graveyard that contains hundreds of thousands of fossils, including dinosaur bones, fish, alligators, toads, reptiles, amphibians. And you have to ask this question: what could cause 1 million square miles to be engulfed in water? Because it had to have been water, because a lot of these dinosaurs were buried quickly and protected, and thus were able to be fossilized. If it was just a dust storm that the Yucatan asteroid, that the Chicxulub asteroid caused, then this wouldn't make any sense. The dinosaurs would have had to have been buried by water in order to be preserved. The Chicxulub asteroid missed the heart of the kill zone, like I said, roughly 2,000 miles away from where most dinosaurs were buried and killed. And we find that the dinosaurs were choking on mud. They're buried with fish. They're buried with sea life, crustaceans, sharks. How in the world do you bury sharks with dinosaurs in the center of the USA? Considering that the center of the USA is hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the oceanic coast. Really think about that, folks. This proves beyond any shadow of doubt, and I know we're talking about dinosaurs, but Noah's flood best explains why a lot of them were wiped out and thus able to be preserved by being buried rapidly. Because you really think about it. I mean, you've got water coming in from hundreds of miles away from the oceanic coast, and if water could cover just 1 or 2 states in, if a wave could come in and cover that much land, that means that it was a globally catastrophic event, that Noah was a real person that actually existed. It's not a fairy story. A fairy tale is the idea that dinosaurs farted themselves to death, or that caterpillars ate them out of existence, or that dinosaurs just died from starvation, or that they ate too much. And I've even heard some people say that dinosaurs slipped their discs in their backs because they had really bad backs, apparently, or they got overweight and just killed themselves that way. It makes no sense. And I've actually heard a creation scientist say this. I think it was Dr. Charles Jackson, and I really agreed with him. I thought it was a great point. He said that it's unbelievable what unbelievers will believe to remain unbelievers. And I feel like that is really quite true. It's really unbelievable that some people would actually think that caterpillars killed the dinosaurs, but then they'll claim the Bible's a fairy tale. That doesn't make any sense. It's a shame that people do that. Now, in the dinosaur graveyards, we find that they died in an asphyxiated position, meaning that they had drowned. And like I said, they were covered in soot and they were choking on mud, which comes from a flood. And even if we look at the blood cells of the Triceratops that were buried in this flood, we can find that they were clotted cells. What does that indicate? That they were drowned. yet another cross-referenced piece of evidence. We find plant life inside of dinosaur stomachs, ferns, etc. How in the world would that have not digested? This dinosaur must have been buried so quickly and protected very quickly in order for the plant life inside of its stomach to be able to be preserved to begin with. And Matt pointed this out to me, and I thought it was great, so I added it here, that even in American museums today, they will admit that dinosaurs were killed by massive floods. In the center of the United States is where these dinosaur graveyards are that these museums are describing. A herd of dinosaurs died in a flood or some other catastrophe. Massive flood events may have killed thousands of dinosaurs at one time. 10,000 dinosaurs buried by a catastrophic inundation. Hundreds of dinosaurs, excuse me, hundreds of dinosaurs buried together with shark teeth. Dinosaurs, fish, and clams buried in a 100-yard wide flood deposit. A large ancient flood washed over the starfish all at once, entombing them. Giant trees stripped and quickly buried by an ancient flood. Hundreds of dinosaurs died and were washed and were buried by flash floods. To me, that is just incredible that even secularists, secular paleontologists will admit, and geologists, that flooding is what caused these extinctions to happen in these different places, these wiping out of these dinosaur species here. And for sake of time, we're just going to move quickly. Like I said, you can see that the blood cells are clotted many times, again, indicating that they did drown. Now, can you guys hear me well so far? Is everything good so far here?
Yep.
You're coming in great. Excellent visuals as well, Matt. You're doing a great job.
Thanks. Did you guys have any thoughts on any of this or any comments?
Yeah, I like what you pointed out earlier. I'm just paraphrasing here, but I think it was Charles Jackson that you pointed to. The wild things that guardians of evolution will believe rather than believing the Bible. It's like anything but God, anything but Jesus Christ. They'll believe in, and then the guts to call these things science. It's pseudoscience, as you're showing, Matt.
100%. 100%.
And I've got a couple of things to add to your list. A matter of fact, another extinction event for the dinosaurs was that possibly they weighed so much that as they walked across the land, they destroyed the topsoil so they couldn't even eat anymore. It's called the sauropod paradox. So what they did is, I can show you, is that they took large machines that weighed almost as much as sauropods, and as they rolled them over the grass, it obviously kills the entire topsoil so nothing can grow. So how could there be millions of years of ceratops walking across the ground, destroying it, and have them eating at the same time? It's called the sauropod paradox. That was a good one. And then I also have another slide, which I'll show you. It's another step to the flood, where it shows all of the fossils around the coastal lines as the flood was receding. So that's another good one I'll show you.
Incredible. Incredible. Great thoughts, guys. And you know what I find interesting is a lot of people claim that dinosaurs are not even in the Bible. A lot of skeptics will say this, because the word dinosaur doesn't exist in the Bible. Well, we all know that the word dinosaur wasn't even invented till 1841. King James Bible was translated into English in 1611. So of course it's not going to have dinosaur in it, but it does have animals that we could describe or that it gives descriptions of that fit a dinosaur. For example, behemoth. Check this out. It says, "Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox." And a lot of Darwinists for many years have laughed at this because they believed for many years that dinosaurs never ate grass, or they never even saw grass. Well, it turns out that fossilized dung that supposedly lasted millions of years, poop of dinosaurs, was found, and it showed that dinosaurs did in fact eat grass. Textbooks have long taught that the grasses did not become common until long after the dinosaurs died at the end of the Cretaceous period 65 million years ago. Depicting dinosaurs munching on grass was considered by experts to be as foolish as showing prehistoric humans hunting dinosaurs with spears. Well, what does that tell you? These guys were wrong. The Bible was right. Dinosaur dung shows that they did eat grass. Bible says he moveth his tail like a cedar. The soonest of his stones are wrapped together. Obviously, the movement of a tail, that if you have a creature, right, that has a tail that the Bible is describing that's as big as a cedar tree, how in the world could theistic evolutionists be correct when they assert that it's talking about a hippopotamus or an elephant? It makes no sense. The only creature that could fit this description would be a brachiosaur. And a lot of people say, you know, hippopotamus moved its tail like a cedar. Sure. Yeah, not quite, Mr. Elephant. Definitely not a cedar tree-like tail. He moveth his tail like a weeping willow, according to Darwinian evolution. But what I would say is that it best describes a brachiosaur. And if this wasn't talking about a brachiosaur, then what could this possibly be? What kind of animal could the Bible be describing? We don't know of another creature that has a tail that we could define as being as huge as a cedar tree. Incredible. And like I said earlier, the thing on grass, here's from Nature. It says dinosaurs munched on grassy snacks. And in the paper, they state this, and this is not quote mined at all. This is not taken out of context. They literally say in the paper on the right, you can see the words. It says, it was very unexpected. We will have to rewrite our understanding of its evolution. When you say you have to rewrite something, that means that previously whatever was asserted was a complete lie. And so they're just making up stories. I mean, using the word rewrite, and like I said, it's in the paper, that's indicative of this being a huge myth, a story. Rewrite. It's a joke. They're ever changing and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Check this out. Leviathan. We don't have a lot of time to get into him, but the Bible says, canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a closed seal. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. We would probably describe that or define that today as being a dragon. Well, if people back then never saw dragon-like creatures or dinosaur-like creatures, then how is the Bible describing them before we've even come across them? It wouldn't make any sense. We had to have seen these animals in the past. Dinosaurs and humans. Here's from National Geographic in January of 1993. They say that no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Okay, well, in the Chinese zodiac, which was invented just after the time of Christ, they have a dragon along with a bunch of other creatures that are legit creatures. But we're supposed to believe that they have one mythical animal on the zodiac? That would not make any sense. They obviously saw these creatures. Look at this, a Mesopotamian cylinder seal. On it, you can actually see brachiosauruses that they had engraved onto this seal. It is really quite incredible. Here's the Temple of Khmer in Cambodia, built around 1100 years ago. And on there, you can see a Stegosaurus. Now, a lot of people have said that that is a pig. That cannot possibly be a pig. Look at the plates on its back. I'm sorry, Darwinists are wrong about this when they assert that it was a pig or that it was some other animal. There's no other animal that fits that description in the animal kingdom. And there's also a lot of other animal engravings, like art, at this temple. And they're obviously creatures that we know existed throughout all time. And so this means dinosaurs must have existed throughout all time, up until they went extinct, of course. Now check out these artifacts. They're separated in time by hundreds of years, but they're also separated geographically by hundreds of miles. So you're seeing different civilizations and different people groups at different times observing the same types of creatures. Here's from Bishop Bell's tomb. This was a tomb that was put together in the 15th century. And what I find interesting is they actually do have dinosaur engravings on the tomb. If the first dinosaur was, if the first dinosaur skeleton was erected and put together and excavated in the 1800s, how would this make sense if we never saw dinosaurs? Check this out, a slate palette. Well, this is actually really famous. I believe this was discovered a few decades ago. Not a lot of Darwinists really like to talk about it because you can see two long-necked dinosaurs on there. And this is a legit artifact. It is not a fake. Even Darwinian evolutionists know that. Check this out. Here's from the Aborigines. They drew what they call the Yaru, which we would define as plesiosaur based on the drawing itself. And you can see the little kids that the Aborigines had there in the picture. I thought that was actually kind of funny. Thought I'd point that out. Here's from Answers in Genesis. This is one of their great points that they make. Here's the enhanced photo of a petroglyph from Native Americans under the Kachina Bridge. And so that's out in Utah, and I find that to be quite interesting as well. You can see, I think it's 12 people hunting a brachiosaur here. Again, these are legitimate places you can go. They're actual places that have been fact-checked to be authentic. None of this is a conspiracy. Even the mainstream accepts these artifacts as being real. But what they'll try to do is define them as some other animal than what it actually obviously is, because they don't want the truth. They want to hide it from the public. First soft-shelled dinosaur egg found, fossils found. I thought that was interesting. Quite incredible. It must have been buried and protected rapidly for it to be preserved. Again, indicating flooding. Let me see. You know, I debated Dr. Kenny Rhodes from Reasons to Believe back in 2021. It was actually on Standing for Truth where we had our conversation. And when I showed him these dinosaur and man footprints together, he asserted that there was a creature that had a foot that looked like a man's foot back millions of years ago, instead of this actually being real human footprints. I think that is a humongous stretch. This could not have been created by erosion. These legitimate findings of human and dinosaur footprints in the same rock indicate that humans and dinosaurs existed during the same time. And so I'll end this presentation with this verse here. The Bible says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Jesus said that he's the way, the truth, and the life, and he talked about Noah's flood as if it was a fact. He referenced the creation as if it was a matter of fact. And I would say this, if somebody died and resurrected from the dead, to me, that is the ultimate proof that you can trust anything that they say. If Matt Nailor died right now and he rose physically from the dead, I'm going to listen very carefully to everything he's saying, and it's Bible. Well, get this, 2,000 years ago, and historians even know it, that Jesus did die and resurrect himself from the dead. It is incredible. You'd have to have more faith to neglect what he said about the creation and about Adam and Eve, which is what Donny and Matt are about to cover, than to accept these facts as true. It'd take much more ridiculous, ludicrous, and irrational faith in the unknown and unlearned, ridiculous hypotheses that aren't even really based in observation, that we descended from fish or soup. And I've even heard some people say that we've descended from rocks. Now, Darwinian evolutionists are asserting that we came from rocks, and I have video proof of that. I have people on camera telling me that rocks are our first ancestors. So, yeah, I mean, if Jesus spoke about the flood and said that it was a fact, and if he spoke about Genesis and quoted the Old Testament, then we should believe the Genesis account of creation because he rose from the dead. And if Noah's flood happened, which we know it did, that means everything else in the Bible is true as well. It has been fact checked. It is all legitimate. Do not let Bill Nye and other people on TV lie to you and tell you that it's not true. God has told us in his word what the truth is. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Donnie.
Matt, excellent presentation. Fantastic slides and visuals. I appreciate the work you put into that. And I like to say, I first heard it from Frank Turek. If somebody rose from the dead, it would be wise to believe everything they say and trust them. And that would be our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so, Matt, you had so many excellent arguments there for on many different things. One specific, the reality of dinosaurs and man coexisting. And these images are fascinating and really just irrefutable, but yet all you would need is one or two. Let's just say, for sake of argument, the evolutionists or the atheists could find a refutation for 99% of those images. Evidence that man lived with dinosaurs, since they're depicting dinosaurs or what they would refer to as dragons, or in the Bible, Leviathan and Behemoth, tail like a cedar, certainly doesn't fit that of an elephant or a hippo. Those have been refuted. And so what if, Matt, what if they were to say, well, some ancient civilization simply came across some dinosaur fossils that were sticking out of the ground, and so they picked it up and they imagined what it looked like and therefore depicted the whole thing, let's say based on a femur, or maybe they found a piece of a skull. How would you rebut that?
It's kind of funny. I mean, I wonder, do people actually make that argument?
I've heard it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is shocking. Well, what I would say is I mean, that would be completely irrational because most dinosaur graveyards are filled with dinosaurs that are disarticulated. Most dinosaur skeletons have completely been blown apart, and then the fossils were covered. What that tells us is that the floodwaters literally were ripping them apart. The moving water with sand and mud in it was like sandpaper. Liquid sandpaper was blowing organisms apart. And so, yeah, I mean, the first skeleton wasn't even excavated till the 1840s. So there's no way that they could have possibly known, just based on one or two bones or just different bones that they found, what a dinosaur would have looked like. It's impossible.
That's right. It's not like you find just sticking out of the ground the entire skeleton of a T-Rex or a Stegosaurus or a Brachiosaurus. No, you find disarticulated bones. You find bones in isolation. And so if they were to just find a single bone or even a set of bones, right? And from there, they depict the creature in the examples that you've shown. A couple fascinating examples, I would say. One is oh, I think I cut out there, Matt.
Wow. Yeah,
Glitchy.
Am I back? Am I good?
Yeah.
You're back.
Okay. Matt, I think you had a couple slides you wanted to present. I just want to check my connection upstairs real quick. Did you want to pull those up?
Yeah.
Something that could that comp, because I noticed you said you had a couple visuals that complement what brother Matt Powell was saying.
Yes. Yeah. I'll drag those up real quick.
Yeah. Let me double check something on my end. And then to the audience, feel free to send in your questions and challenges.
All right. Where are we? Sorry, Matt Powell.
All good.
I was scrolling down for something else, and he's bringing me back to what we were talking about earlier.
Brian says we got 2 Matts on stage. Yes, 2 Matts who are both warriors for creation, warriors for Christianity, dismantlers of evolution. Yeah, there we go, Matt. That's what I was thinking, brother.
Yeah, this is a great picture because it shows the fossils shift closer to the shoreline as the ocean levels, water was receding from the flood. That's exactly what we would expect to find if there was water covering the continent in such a massive way. Instead of just saying, oh, it was an ancient seaway, and for millions of years there was different floods that covered and buried dinosaurs at different times. Well, if that's the case, how do you explain massive fossils around the coastlines where water is running back into the ocean again after covering the continent? I think a pictures are worth 1,000 words, and that one's a great one to explain that. And another one is the dinosaur paradox that we have. So supposedly over time, dinosaurs have been living for millions of years. So based on that, there should be about 2.5 billion individuals that have lived over evolutionary time, but as high as 42 billion. Okay, well, that brings us to the next question. If that's true, how many have we actually found? Well, it's not too good for evolution because we actually haven't found that many. We found 0.0000001% of all of those dinosaurs being found. Now, if that's really what's going on here, that's a really bad sign. It's called an argument from silence. It's where you don't have evidence, but you just say it happened anyway. And isn't that ironic and kind of funny that that's what they claim we do all the time? You guys don't have an argument. It's just, you just make it up as you go along. Really? Is that true? Okay, well then. Now, remember what I was telling you about the sauropod paradox? This is the study. And this is still a paradox to this day. It's not an old argument by any means. It's brand new. And this study is published and you can find it. And here's where they talk about, we hypothesize that the prehistoric giants may have induced subsoil compaction, thus presenting a paradox for the productivity of the land that supports them. How can they walk around weighing so much, destroying the very soil that they supplies them the food, the grass that they eat, when they weigh so much that everywhere they would walk as a group, kind of like elephants today, they work in herds. So did the dinosaurs. So if they're walking in herds, killing the very ground that they're eating from, and it doesn't grow back, how does the next generation survive? It's called the sauropod paradox, and it's a real issue, and it's a dinosaur problem. So those were the things that I wanted to cover that Matt Powell presented that I just instantly came to my mind as a problem. We can see evidence of a flood all over, even in Africa. When you look at the pictures, I mean, look at it going directly into the ocean, the runoff, just pushing it right back. You can follow the sand into the water. How is that still there after millions of years? If subduction is occurring even at the slow evolutionary rate, you wouldn't find what we actually see. It's very contradictory with what the evidence is. Remember, this is the old seaway that ran across Africa when it was still green and lush. Yet what we have today is a complete desert. So we have to ask ourselves, wow, like how long ago did this happen? You'll start to notice a theme with my presentation later. And that theme is always going to run into the spotlight of about 5,000 years. And that's what we're going to cover later, and why that theme is so consistent and why we see it everywhere. But I know Donnie wanted to go next. So if he's around, we will. If not, I will keep going. I'll give him 3 seconds. If he doesn't jump in, I'm going for it. Oh, I see a question right here. Bingo, bango, right on that very topic. Oh, that question is for Matt Powell, but it looks like I'm going to do it for him. How would you explain the Egyptian pyramids and dynasties dating before the flood happened? Well, just depends on the timeline, I guess you want to believe. The old chronology of the biblical dates If you look back at the oldest Bibles, they date much older from the flood than they more current versions do. That's because there's two actual different chronologies of the scriptures. One comes from the Greek Septuagint, which is older, and the other comes from the Masoretic. The Masoretic text, which you can see right here is the dates of when they had their children, is much different than the older scriptures. So they got changed at some point in time. And by using the new chronology, or the older chronology that people believed, the global flood was 5,325 years ago. So therefore, the Egyptian chronology is much later, over 1,000 years later. So it makes much more sense. Oh, and Donnie is back, so I will shut up now.
Matt, good stuff as always. Yeah, I should be good. I did all my checks and everything, so I think it was just a momentary glitch. But if there are any issues, let me know right away. As
looks
as
like
I'm
Powell
talking.
Powell had one too. He's gone too.
Did he just get raptured on us? Well, I guess while maybe we'll give him a couple seconds here to get back with us. But I know you're good at answering these dating related questions. So Hebrew Canon is wondering, how would you address?
Oh, I just answered that one when you were gone.
Oh, is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this one from our good friend Creationist Crybaby? According to radiometric dating, the Morrison Formation with the dinosaur fossils dates from 156.3 million years old at its base to 146.8 million years old at the top. I mean, at the end of the day, it would also come down to, I think, a general answer, Matt, a general answer on radiometric dating. Should we even trust radiometric dating? I'll just say this real quick before you go into a comprehensive answer, as it's such a big topic. Matt Powell, he pointed to some irregularities in dating methods like C14 in his presentation briefly. The fact that we find C14 in measurable amounts in dinosaur fossils, we know we also find C14 in other samples where they should not exist, because C14 has such a short half-life that there shouldn't be any C14 at all in things like diamonds, dinosaur fossils. We shouldn't find C14 in anything that supposedly is millions to billions of years old, and yet we find C14 in basically anything that has carbon in it. And it's not just in trace amounts, it's not just background limits. We've demolished those, we've decimated all those arguments. Contamination doesn't work. Recharging the C14 from nearby nuclear material doesn't work either. We've addressed all those in video form. So the whole point is C14 puts a limit on the age of the Earth. You don't have 156 million years. You don't have 146 million years, because if you did, you shouldn't find that C14. Anyways, Matt, I'm going to hand it to you now, brother, to specifically engage this example on the dating of the Morrison Formation.
Sure. All right. Well, let me remove the question so you can see the screen. All right. What you're looking at is the fossil record as it's laid out in its entirety. What you're going to notice right next to it is the weight, the atomic weight of radioactive elements. And what is here on a test actually shows you the discontinuity of the weight of the elements being deeper than the lighter elements. So if older elements sink deeper and they date older, obviously it's going to show you that people think now that the older layers are representative of deep time, when they're not. The study literally shows you that they're not how they're supposed to be, based on evolutionary idea, where they would be distributed globally in a very distant rate. So what I'm talking about is, when we go to the Proton 21 laboratories in Ukraine, we can literally watch radioactive elements being formed. And when they formed, they use cold fusion, and they produce the same radioactive elements that we have on the Earth today in the same proportions and the same ratios. But if they were only made 3 days earlier, how in the world can they test billions of years old? That right there tells us that these elements are not very good for dating the age of the Earth. Now, they make great watches. There's no doubt that they can tell time, but they can't be used to tell the history of time, because you would have had to have known the exact ratios of the daughter and parent elements. Now we know that when we watch them form, they form in exactly the opposite of what evolution would ever predict. And here's the actual study on those things. These are the natural ratio is right here in the blue, and the ratio after experimentation is in the yellow. Well, notice the daughter elements are always much higher. Well, what do we know about daughter elements? They decay very rapidly. So if they're decaying rapidly within hours, weeks, months, and years, as opposed to millions and billions of years, then you don't need a lot of time to pass before these daughter elements start forming iron, the daughter element of all of the radioactive decay chains. So therefore, when we look in zircon crystal and we notice that there's lots of this lead, and we go, oh man, billions of years must have passed for that to happen. Absolutely not. A very short of time could have actually passed for it to give those old dates. And now we have the observational study and evidence from a lab experiment that repeatedly did this over and over. Unfortunately, the lab in Ukraine now is down because this is where war is going on. But needless to say, we got exactly what we needed from the experiment, which is all that we needed to show that something formed a few days ago and it's billions of years old today. How long did time pass? Just a few days. That's it. We have the same thing with when you look at the mid-Atlantic ridge and you see the sleet force spreading. When they test the lava flows that are just a few years old, they dated 22 million years. What is going on? They know now that you can't rely on these dates. They admit this, and this is in published peer-reviewed secular journals. This isn't just some kind of like made-up young earth creationist thing. You can read the journals and see like, uh-oh, this isn't working. So that's how we would answer why older layers date the way they do, and they can't be trusted. They can't make predictions on these, and they don't get anything right anyway. So it just makes it really easy for us as creationists to say, there's a couple dating methods that are going to be used to date something recently, like carbon dating, but we're going to show you why you can't date things in the deep past with it soon in my presentation.
Right. So you're saying your rapidly decaying dating methods like C14 don't work, but also your slower decaying methods like potassium to argon, uranium to lead, these ones also don't work. They're not to be trusted for at least an older Earth.
Right. Yeah. From multiple experiments, but it also explains why they are in the shape and the form that they are, and why they're distributed in the fossil record the way that they are. So it can help people answer like that really hard question, like, wait, why are they dating old? Is God trying to trick us? Like, what's going on here? It's like, well, not really. I mean, it's an arbitrary thing. You can't pick up two rocks and say, this one definitely looks older than this one. That's subjective. So what we did is we went to the radiometric dating, and we assume something about the past. We had to assume how many daughter to parent to daughter isotope ratio there actually was. When you take away those assumptions and you just go with experiment, we can see right away the answer, and we don't need to assume anything anymore. It's the best study ever, really. I love the Proton 21 laboratories. And I heard Erica mention, like, what about the layering? It didn't form any layers in the experiment. What was she talking about? It's an empty room with a single piece of copper in there being hit by a piece of lightning, creating these different elements. There's no layers that are going to form. There's no soil that's in there for them to be distributed in. I don't even know what she's talking about. So what we are showing you is that when they do form, when a piece of lightning, like Z-pinch, hits a piece of copper, it literally forms the elements that we see today. If this was being done a long time ago, like here's the iron that formed from a cold fusion experiment that was done. You can look it up right here at Montclair State University. He left and went to the Proton 21 laboratories, the guy that formed this. The iron ratios are exactly like that we find them on Earth today. Why aren't they in proportions that they would have been billions of years ago? Right? I mean, if the Earth is billions of years old, and then we had an experiment where we formed iron, shouldn't it form in ratios that would have been on Earth billions of years ago and not as they exactly are today? It's obvious. The same thing happens with radioactive elements. We should be seeing the ratios as they would have been billions of years ago. And then time decayed, and now obviously a lot of the parent isotope is left, and now it's a daughter isotope. That's not what we see. The same ratio that is in Earth today is how they formed in the experiment.
How does the proton lab experiments, the Z-pinch experiments. How does that work to solve, Matt, or give us a sufficient answer to the heat problem challenge?
Because we don't have to invoke accelerated nuclear decay. See what happened is the Answers in Genesis, the rate team, they invented a catastrophic plate tectonics. But what happened is Russell Humphrey, I believe, was looked inside of zircon crystal, and he noticed that it looked really old because there was lots of the daughter element lead, which is the daughter element through the decay chain. So he saw lots of lead, but then he saw lots of helium. So he goes, wow, weird. It looks really old, but it also looks really young. It can't be both. So they invented a rescue device called accelerated nuclear decay. It must have accelerated from uranium to thorium all the way down into lead, making lots of the daughter isotope lead that's in that zircon crystal, because zircon cannot trap lead. So it has to come through that decay chain. What we've seen is that when the Proton 21 laboratories created these radioactive elements, they had massive amounts of daughter isotopes, very, very high, which decay rapidly into lead with over weeks and months and years. So it doesn't take that long of a time to generate all of that lead. That's the cool part about it. The proportions that they created were way higher, like I showed you in that other image, were way higher than they ever expected or anticipated. So when the zircon crystal trapped that initial from the rock around it, when it was trapping around the rock and grabbing onto that radioactive elements and trapping it in that zircon crystal, it was decaying into lead very, very rapidly. Did not need millions of years, and it did not need accelerated nuclear decay.
Well, what's great is you still get that amazing line of evidence for young Earth. The fact that we still find helium, which is a very slippery molecule. We still find helium in these zircon crystals. These zircon crystals are supposed to be billions of years old, and therefore all of that helium should have leaked out into the atmosphere. It shouldn't be there, and yet we find an abundance of helium in all of these rocks, telling us that these rocks can't be billions of years old. And so one explanation, which I don't think the critics can deal with, is that, okay, we find in the zircon crystals evidence for them being young, but we also find evidence for decay. But the fact that we find evidence for decay and yet still helium present, then that decay must have been accelerated, or it must have been rapid to retain the helium without it escaping. But you're saying that there is an alternative hypothesis that is still a problem. It's still a challenge to old earthers, certainly not to young earth creationists, where that helium can be there, the lead can be there, but not through accelerated decay.
Correct. Exactly. It solves the heat problem. It solves deep time problem. It literally answers, and it's a laboratory experiment, which is observable, testable, and repeatable. Literally the gold standard of science. It's not some hypothetical scenario that we would expect, like, oh, we're going to go look for this and we're going to find it. No, they weren't expecting this. And the laboratory that did it, they're not even looking at the dates. They don't even care about that. They're selling it for laboratory equipment to make money in hospitals for lasers.
These are preclusionary data points: helium and zircon crystals, the C14 that we find in diamonds. So let me debunk a couple of these comments. Andrew Cummings says, no, we don't find intrinsic C14 in these samples. The levels are consistent with instrument background. No, that's not true, which would vary between samples. None of this was predicted that, well, there shouldn't be any C14, but for XYZ, we might find C14. No. It was always a shock, continues to be a shock. That's why they invoke rescue devices. Matt, am I coming in okay? Any glitching or anything?
Nope. Sound good.
Okay, good. Keep me posted on that. So right here, for example, we have in what? A creationist journal? No, this is secular radiocarbon literature. Okay. These are samples. They're found in specific positions in the so-called geological record. They should be entirely C14 free. There shouldn't be C14 in these marbles, these shells, this wood. Okay. And yet notice this C14 value corresponds to what? 1,270 times the AMS detection limit. That is not just background radiation. These rescue devices are weak. They're boring. The guardians of common descent and an old earth, they need to come up with something better. because these aren't working. Okay. This is from the secular radiocarbon literature. I see comment after comment in the comment section of people saying, oh, this argument from C14 found in diamonds, for example, or found in dinosaur fossils in wood. Creationists are just making this up. This is their own invented argument. No, again, this is from the secular radiocarbon literature. And the rate team, John Baumgartner, Andrew Snelling, Russell Humphreys, just to name a few, they went in and they checked, is this true? How true is this? What we're finding in the secular radiocarbon literature. And so they analyzed 10 coal samples, and they also analyzed all of these diamonds. These specifically are 6 African diamonds. Notice with the African diamonds, Matt 1, Matt 2, results are between what? 40 times and 310 times the AMS detection limit. Diamonds are the hardest substance on the earth. They're formed deep within the earth. They're shielded from cosmic ray bombardment in the atmosphere, right? That's how C14 is created. In the atmosphere, you get cosmic ray bombardment where the nitrogen turns into C14. Animals absorb the C14. Plants absorb the C14. We as humans eat the animals, or we eat the plants. And so we're constantly taking in C14. And so we are part radioactive. We all have a little bit of C14, but it decays rapidly. 5,700 years, okay, roughly. And so when we die, we're not taking in any more C14 because now we're dead. We're not eating or consuming any plants or animals. And so that C14 decays away. There shouldn't be any C14. If every atom in the universe was made of C14, there'd be no C14 left in a million years. And you're telling me that we find between 40 times and 310 times the AMS detection limit in terms of C14 in these diamonds, which are found deep within the earth, again, shielded from cosmic ray bombardment in the atmosphere. So yes, Andrew, this C14 must be intrinsic to the diamonds. Okay, these rescue devices don't work. Environmental contamination doesn't work. Lab contamination doesn't work. And here's these examples from these 10 coal samples. They were analyzed, high precision procedures took place, and they found 247 times the AMS detection limit. Okay, so there's just a few direct points that refute that argument. Matt, you'd probably like to debunk this one. We kind of addressed this one earlier, Sydney Raptor, in an earlier show. So then they'll say, well, okay, so they're not really addressing the argument, brothers, but they're saying, well, okay, you get C14 in samples supposedly millions to billions of years old, that's it. That refutes the idea that the earth is 4.5 billion years old. But they'll say, how come you're not getting dates of exactly 6,000 years? How come you're getting 40,000, 50,000, 60,000? Matt, did you want to engage that a little bit?
Absolutely.
All right. We got some visuals ready for that one. There you go, brother.
Yeah, like usual, huh? Okay. So this is Göbekli Tepe, and this is considered one of the oldest temples humans ever made. Now, if we look at it, we'll say, okay, well, how was it dated? When was it dated? I think they got around 9,000 years, 8,000, right around there, and some even older. But here it is. At least within the group of samples chosen, collagen preservation is poor, and the carbon-rich sediments of Göbekli Tepe may have caused a problem with the dating itself. So they used carbon dating to actually date this, but you'll notice a word at the very bottom. What they did is they calibrated the dates. You'll notice that term quite often in evolutionary concepts. Carbon dating is no different. So if you look at all of their different things here, they added about 2,000 years for the radiocarbon dating, based on carbon loss over time. So it's a historical thing. But what they also do when they calibrate something is they look at radiocarbon and tree rings. They date things by tree rings. But what do we know about tree ring dating? When we go to that, I will find that slide. I have one around here. We're going to notice that the oldest trees only go back 4,900 years. Exactly around biblical timeline. So why in the world could they be able to date a temple or a Göbekli Tepe 9,000 years calibrating the dates by using tree ring dating, which we know that is one of their main calibration tools when there's no trees older than 5,000 years to calibrate with. So they calibrate based on their perception of the time. But there's another problem as well. Volcanoes lie. This is the name of one of these things. One of the eruptions showed that the date many time older are actually all over the place. We'll notice that this one had a large spread of date between 36 CE and 538. So almost that's basically over 500-year discrepancy in a single dating method. Why would that be? It's because this is a great comment that was made right here. Assuming a flood did occur, I don't think this person even believed in young Earth. Little, if any, C14 may have existed before then. So the flood would give anything older than the flood a false appearance of age. Isn't that interesting? So when you go back and you say, well, why is that? You can ask AI. Yep. Just ask if a supervolcano would throw off the dates. Yes, a supervolcano just by itself would, because it could significantly alter carbon dates, particularly because of making samples appear older than they actually are, is known as volcanic carbon bias. And why is that? Because it effectively dilutes the atmospheric radiocarbon 14 and causes dating of items to appear older. What do we say in the biblical creation model? That when the flood ended, there was massive amounts of volcanism. And volcanism did what? Caused worldwide volcanoes to go off. Massive volcanoes started the ice age, right? So if that started the ice age and there's volcanic ash being spread all over the place, what would you expect the dating that to do with the dating? Of course, it would be all over the place. It'd be a mess. And that's exactly what we see. And this is that's with carbon. I don't think you guys can hear this. Could you guys hear that at all? Okay, good. That's fine. That's fine. We'll go to this study. And what they did is they submitted massive amounts of things to a particular laboratories all over the place to see how accurate carbon dating was. They got the results back with only 18% accuracy. It was just a mess. It was that bad. So the accuracy is not very good. And then we can have see some people that actually admit what you're not expecting them to admit. So no matter how useful it is, though the radioactive radiocarbon method is still not capable of yielding accurate and reliable dates, there are gross discrepancies. The chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are usually selected dates. This whole blessed thing is nothing but a 13th century alchemy, and all depends upon the funny paper that you read. Interesting, huh? How about if a C14 dates support our theory, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict them, we put it in a footnote. And if it completely out of date, we just drop it. Ooh, interesting, huh? So the troubles for carbon dating methods are undeniably deep and serious. Despite 35 years of technological refinement and better understandings, the underlying assumptions have been strongly challenged. It should be no surprise, then, that fully half of the dates are rejected. The wonder is that the remaining half even come to be accepted. Interesting, isn't it? Just right from their own mouth. They just literally admit these things. So I just really like that if we can go and we can say, well, what if there was massive volcanism? Would that change the dates of things that are being carbon dated in the deep past? Yes, it would. They would have to be thrown out, or they would just be massively wrong. And if there actually was a flood, anything that was after the flood would date massively older using carbon dating, but there would still be carbon. Notice that? There would still be carbon in them, but they would be massively older. And it's exactly what we see with dinosaur bones. We find them sometimes 10 to 20,000 years old when there shouldn't be any carbon at all in them. So it's
well,
just
and
really,
notice this real quick. It doesn't improve for them as time goes on. Andrew says, oh, look, a 1981 quote. And we do appreciate our critics and skeptics here to engage.
Yeah, they hate that we actually give answers,
Right. So he says, I wonder how much the methods have improved since then. Well, they've shown even more to be unreliable. I mean, look at the rate team. They took rocks that just formed, subjected those to all kinds of dating methods, and they came back at millions of years, even though they were just formed. Okay, so why in the world would we trust dates given to us by evolutionists for rocks of unknown age. We didn't see them formed. Okay. We're just supposed to blindly trust those. And yet these dating methods can't give us dates for rocks of known ages. And we've literally seen them form. Plus the C14, right? The C14 that we find in the diamonds, the C14 in samples where it shouldn't be. There's a strong C14 signal. And again, their best rescue mechanisms like contamination, we've demolished those. So yeah, to answer his question, the methods have only been shown to be that much more unreliable. Matt, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, no, it's just complaining. It's like, oh, it's just, they don't answer the question. They don't actually go, well, here's the reason why, that happened. No, they just like to complain about when they actually were able to admit in science that these are the problems. Now they just don't really do that as much.
Well, let me say this, Matt, just as it comes in. Andrew Snelling just did a 2-hour discussion. Check it out on Apologetics 101. These guys are repeating arguments from people who are repeating arguments from an original source that was debunked years ago. Okay. They got nothing new. And so he says, because Snelling and Austin don't understand geochronology and misinterpreted their Mount St. Helens results. No, the data they got was through sophisticated means. And even the evolutionists use the same means on other examples, other volcanic eruptions, right, with newly formed rocks. And they're happy with that, but they're not happy with these dates because they contradict the actual theory. Okay. They saw the rocks form. They know when they were formed. They tested them. And the reality is they got dates that were inconsistent with the old Earth paradigm. I was debating Jackson Rowe and he said, oh, well, they misinterpreted the data, or they were wrong because they should know that you're not allowed, or you're not supposed to date these rocks that were just formed. And I said, oh, really? Okay. How long are you supposed to wait? He said, well, at least 100,000 years. Okay. So apparently we can't therefore test rocks to see how valid or reliable these dating methods are, because we have to wait 100,000 years before so what if the Earth is young, 6,000 years? Well, then apparently we can never, date these rocks and test them. It's circular reasoning. They're assuming that the Earth is at least 100,000 years old in order to have to wait for these rocks to be 100,000 years to test. And so it's all circular, brothers.
It's convenient for them, isn't it? That's all.
It is. All right, go ahead. I had to throw that in there.
It's okay. That's good enough. I'm going on tangents. We're not even getting to a presentation here. I got to move on.
No, this is good.
Fun going. All right. Okay, today I wanted to go over.
Let me just address this, and then we're going to throw it over to you. Just to leave this one no stone unturned, because it really is a line of evidence. And Brother Matt Powell, I'm so glad you brought it up in your presentation, the C14 and dinosaur fossils. Evolutionists like Getze Gibbon, they like to say this data point precludes creation, right? You'll see she has videos, limestone precludes creation, heat problem precludes creation. We've addressed all those. In reality, C14 precludes evolutionism, precludes old earthism, okay? Because they have no good example. And so not this one, it was the contamination right here. So environmental contamination, like Andrew Cumming is pointing to here. Okay. So these arguments have also been addressed by PhD scientists associated with the rate team. The contamination issue is weak. All right. Somehow modern carbon snuck into all of the fossils all over the entire Earth in every depth and in every kind of fossil. I mean, that's exactly what you'd have to say, because the amount of C14 averages out to be the same regardless of the fossil, where it's found, the depth it's found in, and where in the world it's discovered. Okay. So that means contamination would literally have to be the same in all these instances for the C14 present to be all due to these rescue mechanisms. No, the most parsimonious answer is the C14 is found in coal beds, in bones, in diamonds, for one reason and one reason only, because those samples are not millions to billions of years old. Anyways, Matt, go ahead, brother.
All right. No, I was just showing this picture because, yeah, what the guy said, the calibration is exactly what I already put on screen once. Of course, it's calibrated to the atmospheric variation of abundance of carbon-14 over time as it changed, but they need more information. So that's why they go to tree ring gaining. Why they wouldn't need to calibrate it off of other things if it was completely accurate, calendar years and the other years. So I already talked about that. He must not have been listening.
I have to destroy this one. Sydney Raptor. No, Dr. Russell Humphreys just gave recently in the last 6 months a technical presentation on the helium that's been found in the zircon crystals. The helium should not be there. And when you analyze the amount of helium that's there, look at the diffusion rates, he pointed out that, yeah, what you get is actually very close to 6,000 years. So helium is one of them. We look to mutation rates that give us about 6,000 years. So there are lines of evidence that point right to 6,000 years. But again, this is not actually addressing the evidence that debunks an old Earth. You can't just say, well, it doesn't give you 6,000. It's like, that's not actually addressing the evidence that overturns your billions of years. And they need billions of years to take their pond scum to people, to take their particles to people, to take their goo to you. No, they need billions of years. 100,000 years ain't going to cut it. 50 million years ain't going to cut it. So they really need to start engaging this data. Matt, go ahead, brother.
All right. Well, that's where this comes in. This is like what you and I like to talk about. Consilence, like it's where everything converges and gives you a very similar answer in things. So what I wanted to talk about is before we jump right into that, a lot of people say, well, the Bible story is just taken from the Atrahasis, the Mesopotamian epic, and the Babylonian one, and the Gilgamesh. So we're going to talk about that real quick because we can see that there's a very big difference between the reasons that there's a flood and the difference of the stories. And we have to go to what's called borrowing. Did they actually borrow the ideas? The historians actually say, no, there's no substantial evidence that the Hebrews borrowed the Babylonian text at all. And we can see when we look into the details that they go, there's similarities, but there is no actual shown of borrowing. We use the word plagiarizing today. It is obvious that the differences are too great to encourage belief in direct connection between the Atrahasis and Genesis. But just as obvious, there is some kind of involvement in the historical traditions generally of the two. So it's not plagiarized, it's not borrowed. And when we go to like the Gilgamesh story, of course we can find some similarities because they plagiarized from the biblical one. And how would we know? Because when we go to the details of the story, we can really see that there's a difference between an ark that was made in 1 week that would never survive the open seas. There's a difference. They measured time very differently. They measured the cubits differently. Their mathematical system was very different. Matter of fact, that's why when we see the Sumerian text, that we can read about the 8 kings, but you'll notice their ages are off the charts. What is 36,000 years doing there? Why is that? It's because they use a base 60 sexagismal system where they took a person that was 365 years old and multiplied it times 60. And then boom, you have people living that long. Obviously, their math being completely different than ours is the reason for that. And the reason why those even exist is because they did plagiarize it. Obviously, the Hebrews didn't see their version and go, we need to invent our math system and reduce those ages to 1,000 years. That doesn't make sense either. So no, the Bible is not plagiarized, and you can see the many different reasons for that here. I just wanted to cover that. And also, now we have to say that either all of these people independently invented a global flood narrative, or that one came first and they got handed down orally and lost details over time. Obviously, we want to use what's called Occam's razor, and that's where the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. If it's more convoluted and requires more details to explain, it's oftentimes wrong. And what we're going to cover tonight is the evolutionary paradoxes that exist, the sapient paradox, the forger's paradox, the hominin fossil got paradox, the ancestor paradox, megalithic stone structure paradox, the taxonomic boundary paradox. You get the picture. There's paradoxes everywhere with evolution. They're all solved very easily with our model. Remember, evolution predicts that mankind evolved in Africa for millions of years, 2.8 million years. Or are we going to find evidence that there was a geographic location somewhere in the Middle East where everyone dispersed after a global event? Well, we're going to have to first start with languages. The first language that event. If evolution was true, what's going on? What would we expect to find? Well, we would expect to find an original language in Africa that slowly evolved and sprouted and branched out into all of the languages that we have today. That's pretty obvious. Well, this is a 500 square mile range in the Middle East, starting in the Fertile Crescent area, where we would expect the Tower of Babel to be. And what do we find from there? We find the origins of language. We find the origins of writing systems. Everything we would expect to find if the story of Babel was true, all within the perfect 500 square mile radius, not evolution. So what's going on here? They want us to believe that all of these people worldwide invented language at the same time, around 5,000 years ago, that never met each other. Like, that makes any sense. Or we can go with the Tower of Babel story, which places it right here, exactly where we're going to find evidence within that 500 square mile radius. And how many languages were there supposedly at the Tower of Babel? So the Bible says maybe somewhere around 75, I think the Answers in Genesis prediction was. What did the linguistic experts say? There isn't a single root language. There seems to be 95 to 100 language families that just arise out of nowhere with almost no connection to one another, instead of nothing in Africa whatsoever. So not very good for evolution starting out. Then again, what would we expect people to look like? Well, Africa, it's a pretty big place. So if we're all African, or so we're told, we would expect a natural hierarchical pattern with Africans having massive amounts of diversity. And why is that? Because Africa is huge. Let me grab you a picture of actually how big it is, if I can find it real quick. I'm not going to look too long, but okay, we'll find it later. The biblical model would expect us to all have all of the
Matt,
same.
that last picture brings to memory the epic Dr. Dino versus Jay Bundy. Is that his name? Jay
That's
Bundy.
his name. That's him right there.
I think that was the 300 debate that we hosted like a couple of years ago.
That's a good one. We should premiere it again after this. Okay, so yes, we would expect Africans to have much more genetic diversity. They've been living in Africa. Let's just give it the bottleneck 200,000 years ago. They've been living in Africa for 150,000 years, adapting to every geographic region in the place. The continent's massive, and it has massive valleys, massive mountains, beaches. It has deserts. It has forests. It has tropical rain. It has everything. But yet genetic diversity between everybody is the same. How in the world is that even going to be possible? Obviously, we don't look like primates, but yet when we compare them, the phenotypic diversity is massive between humans and almost nothing between primates. They all have very low phenotypic diversity. Humans have a lot. That's because we have a very different ancestry, and we all diverge from each other at the same time. And we can see this phenotypic diversity even when looking at so-called primitive ancestors. And why is there so much phenotypic diversity in the skulls of ancient people? Because we can see it in dogs. Phenotypic diversity can change drastically in a short amount of time, and it doesn't have to add any morphological features whatsoever. They can just be very, very different. So what we're looking at is, here's Viking cats reveal surprising growth of the size over 2,000 years. This is the ancient one, and here's modern day ones. Massive skull phenotypic diversity. So our model shows that when people got off the ark, they had robust features, not primitive, robust, stronger, better for surviving. And then what happened is an ice age came, and people started to get this unique feature that we call primitive. But we actually see that Neanderthal were very adept to cold. So what happened is, during the ice age, which was brought on by volcanism, is we would see people adapting to that cold region, and they got those phenotypic traits for the cold, which eventually vanished. And why? Because when volcanism occurred and volcanoes spread out the ash over the world, started the ice age. It's exactly what we would expect to see. And we know that people saw these animals because they literally drew them in cave art. We can find them in the Ramayana, which is the Indian epic, where they talk about elephants that have 4 tusks, which is an extinct type of an elephant species. Well, guess what? They only wrote that 4,000 years ago. So what are they writing about? What's going on here? Could they write about ice age animals if they never saw them? So mammoth horse DNA, talk about 5,000 years ago. We got the world's first shopping center, where they during the ice age, they found this piece of 7mm wide carved bone from the ice age, where they were carving into the bone. Anyway, I got off on this. This is basically about phenotypic diversity. Why is it so similar between people? Well, it's because people are very related to each other, and it's not a lot of time has passed. So we went with the traits. And if we had really split, there would be massive amounts of phenotypic diversity between the first earlier people that did survive, as opposed to the newer evolved species that evolved when we left and went up into Europe into the in the polar regions. We don't see that. So that brings us to just like, okay, so we can say anything. Oh yeah, Neanderthal and humans may belong to the same species. It could rewrite history. We always talk about how they're nothing different. We're more similar to them than people ever thought. Remember, evolution predicted that they would never be able to speak. They were called Homo stupidus when they originally came out, and then they slowly became human over time as we learned more. But this comes down to predictions. And we would predict with this new species that got found this week, Antediluvius turkiae, is that where is it going to be placed? They placed it in the human family tree at the origin of the start. Now, everything comes down to predictions, right? Where did they find this? Look, the finding established this is a branch of the human evolutionary tree that gave rise to the chimpanzee, bonobo, gorilla, and humans. Well, here's the skull. Here's what it looks like. So we need to make predictions on anything. So we as creationists would say that it has to have the characteristics of all humans. And therefore, we would place that into the human or into the non-human aspect. And we will see what comes of that, because based on baraminology, that is where that species belongs. It is not part of the human trait. This is human, and everything that branches from it is. And these are all based on different haplogroups and different families that came off the ark. So, again, we can get into more predictions, but I want to go back into something else now. I want you guys to pay attention and see if you can spot the 5,000 years here going on, okay? The sapient paradox. With brains like ours, why did we wait for millennia before even starting civilization? And then when we started it, when did everybody on Earth do the same thing at the same time? Look at that, 5,000 years of human history. The span of recorded human history is only 5,000 years. Civilizations only go back about 5,000 years. The oldest pyramid doesn't even go back 5,000 years, 4,500 years ago. Mathematics, 5,000 years ago. The oldest math, we can see it on ancient script. It's carved in stone. They figured it out right away, right off the ark. Huh? It's almost like people just knew how to do math. But why? About beer brewing. Noah was said got off the ark. What was the first thing he did? He made alcohol. Well, brewing goes right back to the same time period, 5,000 years ago. Look at that. We have carved drawings of them making alcohol right out the gate. Ancient Sumerian beer. And then the Fertile Crescent gave rise to agriculture. Why is that? The biblical area. I mean, they're living in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years. As a matter of fact, millions of years. They're too stupid to figure out how to put a piece of seed in the ground and make it grow. You kidding me? They are here at the history of medicine 5,000 years ago. Look at that. Oh, what a surprise. The official documented knowledge of irrigation. Oh, 5,000 years ago. What a surprise. The history of look at this. About 5,000 years ago, a group of people in different parts of the world began keeping written records. Same time, everybody. No problem. Writing system, easy to invent that. I just waited. I just decided to wait 195,000 years before doing it. I was too bored. Anyway, humans invented writing about 5,000 years ago. That's right. The invention of writing began just about 5,000 years ago. Right? They could only make stone tools for millions of years. We couldn't just do that over decades. We have to believe that fossil record, right? So over 2 million years of human evolution, starting with Homo erectus, and not even one person figured out how to plant a seed in the ground. I want you to remember that. That's how stupid we were. But yet we managed to all invent writing, agriculture, farming, make pyramids, brewing, have genealogies that go back about 5,000 years, have herbalism, what is this? Mathematics, history, cosmology, all going back to the same time period. So I got it, everybody. To-do list, nothing. I'll invent all this later. I'm going to do nothing for those 5,000 years. No.
And Matt, if I could step in real quick.
Sure.
This is so great. This is a slam dunk argument or suite of arguments against evolution in an old Earth. They'll even admit that Homo erectus, because we recently put out a challenge, right? Diaper Dino attempted to refute it and failed miserably. And so they would even admit that Homo erectus was a sophisticated people group. They knew how to sail, navigate the open waters, right? There's a popular article titled something like Homo erectus Sailor. They were able to make fire. Some suggest that they were able to speak, which we're not surprised with, because we would agree that Homo erectus is a sophisticated people group. It's not a pre-human, it's fully human, made in the image of God. Anyways, we put out the challenge that pointed out the fact that, okay, the evolutionary model says that Homo erectus apparently lived on the globe for 1 to 2 million years. They will assert or claim, according to their evolutionary story, that Homo erectus is the most successful human hominin that has ever lived. I mean, 1 to 2 million years. Wow. And yet, as you pointed out, they were never able to figure out how to plant a single seed. But let's say their generation time was 20 to 25 years. Okay. According to the evolutionary model, there's 2 out of Africas. The first out of Africa says that Homo erectus left, and then later on Homo sapiens left, right? So you have erectus living on a pretty large part of the globe across Eurasia, Europe, and Asia. Okay. So let's say their generation time is 1 to 2 million years. Okay. That means you'd expect billions of dead bodies within that 1 to 2 million years. We would expect campsites, grave sites, evidence for their existence. And yet we don't find that. Every single bone associated, gentlemen, with Homo erectus can be fit into the trunk of a car. Okay. One of our critics who just loves us, Dapper Dino, he's like, oh, well, we found a campsite, or we found a this, a that. It's like, that's the point. If they're living on this planet for 1 to 2 million years, we should find billions of dead bodies. We should find countless grave sites, countless campsites. No, the scarcity of fossils, the lack of campsites. We're not denying the fact that they found 1 or 2. That's consistent with our model that they existed after the Tower of Babel, but only for a short amount of time. Okay. There's a lack of stone implements. There's simply no real good evidence for their existence on this planet for 2 million years. Okay. And they would even agree that Homo erectus was a lot smarter than previous hominins. So Matt, my question to you is this, and then continue doing what you're doing, because this is a slam dunk. Has any evolutionist answered this fossil record challenge associated with Homo erectus, and just in general, everything that you're putting forth, suggesting that art, medicine, language, written records, agriculture, it all started suddenly and abruptly 5,000 years ago?
Right. Matter of fact, you don't even have to ask my opinion. We can go right to where I'm pointing with the arrow. It's called the population paradox. We find that there has been a long paradox with no obvious solutions. So why basically the paradox kind of goes like this. The forager population paradox is a puzzling phenomenon where contemporary human foragers are experiencing rapid population growth when we look at them. So why didn't they do it in the past? This is a paradox because most species exhibit near stationary net zero population growth over most of evolutionary history. See what they had to say? Their population didn't really grow very much. Why? Because there's no evidence for them. So they have to invoke net zero population growth for living organisms. Oh, man, it's so good.
Not to interrupt, but I'm going to interrupt because I got to say something.
Yeah, of course. Jump
so
in anytime, brother.
At university, recently I was talking to some students. There was like 8 atheists, and they all wanted to team up on me on video. And so I took them up on it. And one of their points was, wouldn't Adam and Eve have been inbred? Well, if for millions of years and for deep time, you have small populations, would that not be an issue as well, inbreeding?
Oh, exactly. And that's you nailed it, Matt. They're the ones that have an inbreeding problem, because inbreeding reveals the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes. These recessive mutations come to the forefront. They erode existing levels of genetic diversity. They lead to all kinds of harmful diseases. Okay. They're the ones, according to their model, they explain the origin of all, or almost all, genetic diversity as being the result of what? Mutations, deleterious mutation accumulation over time. So yeah, they're going to have a lot of recessive mutations ready to cause harm, disease, and damage from inbreeding. And that's what they have in their out of Africa model, in their evolutionary story. We have what? 3 bottlenecks. You start with Adam and Eve at creation. They're not created with mutations, deleterious mutations. They're created with what's called created heterozygosity, pre-existing diversity. Okay. So yeah, they have DNA differences, but those DNA differences are not due to mutations. That's the evolutionary assumption. Okay, so there's no mutations to come to the forefront to lead to any negative inbreeding effects. Then Adam and Eve, they have kids, their kids have kids. So it's a one generation bottleneck followed by rapid and exponential population growth. That's great. That's healthy for a population. Then at the flood, a couple thousand years later, you have another bottleneck. You have 8 people. Okay, so there'd be some mutations accumulated, but not a whole lot, because the pre-flood world would have been healthier all around in terms of genetics and environment. Okay, that's also a one generation bottleneck followed by rapid and exponential population growth. Okay, so it's a one generation bottleneck. And then you have the Tower of Babel. And then eventually they spread out in all parts of the globe. So there's no inbreeding problem with us, but the evolutionists, they have these bottlenecks. They're extended. They're not just one generation or 2 generations, right, Matt? They go on for hundreds of thousands of years. So hundreds of thousands of years of inbreeding in small populations. That would leave those people groups incredibly genetically compromised, highly inbred. And so it's not feasible, the evolutionary story.
Exactly. Matter of fact, we even have they've also published a study on that right here, where we creationists took it, and we noticed that the findings show that a small population of Neanderthal couldn't even exist for 10,000 years. So how in the world could they have lived for 400,000? Or it just makes no sense. The math doesn't add up because it's just not true. It's really just that simple. Occam's razor, guys. Look at this. According to evolution, the Earth has been here 4.6 billion. Humans have been here about 2.8. But yet, according to the human population growth rates, they're extremely high. They're extremely fast. So the evolutionist has to appeal to the consequences. Their catastrophisms were probably common. The population of the Earth is always dealing with catastrophes. Well, they've actually looked and done studies on that. You can look at the population paradox. The catastrophic scenario for fast-growing populations would have to be every 50 years for it to put the human population at net zero. Catastrophes alone aren't enough to bring them to a net zero population. Think about that. They can't even invoke that as a rescue device anymore. So they come up with another rescue device. Don't worry, it's evolution. Can't falsify it. This one comes from an argument of silence, the one you mentioned, right? They were hunter-gatherers. They were idiots. Well, check this out. This study was done in 1998, where they took a voyage and they took a team and they tried to raft over to a nearby island. It was going to take about a week in before their boat took on water. So trying to replicate a boat that they made 1 million years ago, they couldn't even make the journey. But don't worry. They were able to build these homes. These are called the Terra Amata, and they found them in France. They were able to make this jewelry and toys and carvings of art. But don't worry, they were still too stupid to figure out how to put a seed in the ground. Don't you ever forget that. They could navigate the open sea better than we can today by materials around them than we can replicate. But don't worry, they were still idiots. Always believe that. So evolution and the population paradox, this goes back to how much of a population actually grows. It lines up with the biblical timeline perfectly, exactly what we would expect to do. But it doesn't line up to evolution at all because it's just really simple. It's not true. With a population growth rate of 3% over 759 years from the flood till Babel, we would get about 74,758 or 85 people. So again, paradox solved. There simply hasn't been that much time. It really is the most simple answer every time you look at it, but we'll keep going. We also have a genetic paradox where genetic diversity is about the same. Shouldn't be that way. Look at this. It's thought that the common ancestor of man split 5 to 6 million years ago. More than enough time for substantial genetics to have been the rescue device. Well, there was an unknown global bottleneck that reduced genetic variation in all life. Oh, that sounds like ours, doesn't it? 90% of all life, genetically speaking, is about the same age. Yep, and that goes for aquatic life too. What bottleneck in the evolutionary model kills aquatic life in the ocean and land life at the exact same time? They go, well, there's no evidence in the fossil record 200,000 years ago. Go over to this study. They go, nothing out of the ordinary happened about 200,000 years ago. Nothing out of the ordinary. I don't know why primitive man went in and smart man came out. There's the reason why is because these are just stories. They make it up as they kind of go along. It's just a big mess, human evolution. We know that genetic diversity is low in all things, and it's about the same, even with fast mutation rates, because not a lot of time has passed. It's the only way you can get that. You have fast mutation rates, not a lot of mutations. You can't use evolution as a very good answer anymore.
So Matt, real quick question. So what you're saying, for the audience sake, diversity in humans overall and diversity in non-human animal species both correlate and are in line with 4,500 years ago since the flood?
Right, exactly. We have a fast mutation rate, not a lot of mutations. And what does that mean? You can't have that. You can't have deep time and too few mutations and have a fast mutation rate. Something's got to give. So we can answer that. We go, so when did this imaginary event happen? If there's nothing in the fossil record 200,000 years ago, there's no event, they can't find it. But they know that they have to claim a bottleneck to reduce genetic diversity. The claim is then, when did it happen? If we look at the phylogenetic trees of evolution, they calibrate it to the fossil record, right? So therefore, to them, it had to happen hundreds of thousands of years ago. But what happens when we actually look at the measured rates versus the phylogenetic rate? They don't line up. They don't compare. But yet when we look, what do we find? We find that the pedigree mutation rate matches exactly what we would expect to find in the biblical model of ancestry, going back a little while. And the deep time estimations are falsified. It's very simple. Again, paradoxical. Why? Simply there hasn't been millions of years. This is the easiest thing. We keep going back to it. Now, why does this matter? Because raised mutation rates changes speciation rates. It changes how we answer the diversity of life on Earth. They keep saying, look, things are evolving and speciating in mere decades in our lifetime, right under our noses, faster than Darwin could have ever imagined. It's called phenotypic plasticity. It says it comes from like a comic book. That's how fast things are changing. They would never expect it. Why? Because evolution isn't true. That's why. It literally is that simple. But let's go back to this real quick, because remember, everything's landing on this 5,000 year. When we go back to the genealogies, do we have any in the world that are unbroken chains that go back in time? We do. This is the royal king's line of Queen Elizabeth II. She has an unbroken chain of royalty that goes all the way back to Noah himself on that. And surprise, surprise, how many generations? Exactly what we would expect in the biblical timeline. Why is that? Why didn't they just make up some arbitrary time? What's going on here? How old are the oldest islands on Earth that are made of coral that have sand on top of them? They're called keys. You ever heard of the Key Islands? Oh, look at that. They're around 5,000 years old. Oh my gosh, what a shocker. So that answers that question. How old are some of the oldest islands from coral based? Right there. How about the list of trees on Earth? Well, I showed you earlier from Chronology when we go to their website, 4,900 years. Oh, there's that 5,000 year time limit again, all around the world. Why? Oh man, look at that. Estimated to be about nearly 5,000 years old for the oldest tree. That's Prometheus, right on the biblical timeline. Coral itself. Well, guess what? Coral doesn't really die from old age. What's the oldest one on Earth? It's about 4,000 years old, type of black coral. We can see how to age them because kind of like tree rings, we can literally count them. Very, very easy to do. One of the oldest Great Barrier Reefs on Earth is 4,200 years old using the observable rate of testing. If you use, of course, the evolutionary model, they probably want to go to radiometric dating, date the things around it. But what do we know? We know that these organisms that don't really die from old age, the oldest ones alive, take us right back to the global flood era and the time, making it about 5,000 years ago yet again. Oldest deserts on Earth? The Sahara Desert goes back to about 4,000 years ago until it was eventually green before that. And then the Ice Age melt-off from after the flood, about 1,000 years after the flood, the global Ice Age ended. The ice melted, ran over the continent, and boom, created the first desert. Now we have a completely desert island. What you mentioned earlier, the helium and argon diffusion, helium rates go back. He said the best estimate for everything was 5,100 years ago. The magnetic decay, about 5,000 years ago. Oh my goodness. How about the ocean levels? About 5,000 years ago. This was an island was much different than it is today. It was one of the first man-made islands where they built things on it. They noticed that the sea levels rose much faster. And we can see this everywhere. Look, when we go to different deltas from around the world, they land, the oldest delta is about 5,000 years old. So not very good for evolution. When we go to flood traditions, of course, we find them around the world. critics like to say, well, it's just a local flood. But is that really true? I'm going to say no. And why? Because we can literally go to the Tower of Babel and notice that we have physical evidence that it existed. We have bricks that were made with a mortar that they talk about making it in. We have King Nebuchadnezzar tried to remake Tower of Babel. And then when he died, he had this stone made in his generation. And then later, the Tower of Babel was tried to be made again by Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, when he died, they just stopped the process because obviously he wasn't going to pay people anymore. So I'm sure that project took a dump. So this is it. In 330 BC, Alexander the Great ordered the tower to be destroyed in an effort to be rebuilt. So it was not doing so well. It was probably falling down from Nebuchadnezzar's version that he had. And so he had it demolished and it was going to be rebuilt, but his death ended that. So here's a good one. Chinese is one of the oldest continuously used writing systems on Earth. Okay, ours has changed dramatically. Look at it. This is our modern day one. It goes back to Rome, then Latin, and then Greek, and then Phoenician, and then Proto-Semitic. So ours has changed dramatically. Chinese is not. And inside their writing system is written the story of the biblical one, which is amazing. You can literally read it. Look, God revealed, declared man and garden. Their words, when you tie them together, read them this direction: man, dust, living means first. Second, promised is Noah. Very fascinating. It's the oldest preserved, still used writing system, and they're still using the writing system from Babel, essentially, which is amazing that it formed and then went to there. So pretty cool. But how can we know? Remember, evolution teaches that Africans are the oldest lineage, and they have to be, right? They have more mutations than anybody else. And we can look at that haplogroup, which is A1. We can go backwards in time and say, see, they're the oldest. It's true. They have more mutations. But that's assuming that mutations accumulate at the same rate in all people groups, and that all people groups have generation times the exact same. They do not. So when we look at cats, well, okay, look at this. Here's a funny little picture. Cats can have different mutation rates, but all cats are related. So what's going on? Well, we see when we look at pedigree mutation rates that we see different rates of mutations in all different kinds of people. Here's the Parsons study that showed that the Amish family get one substitution every 80 generations, but the AFDIL families got one every 17. So we know that mutation rates can be different in different groups of people, and that when we observe them, we could test it. We say, okay, well, if that's true, then maybe Africans could possibly be the same age as everyone else. But there has to be evidence. So that's where we go here. De novo mutation rates of single point mutations are faster. Overall point mutations are faster in Africans than they are in Europeans. They have more PRDM9 sites to collect these mutations. They have more SNVs, single nucleotide variances occurring inside them. So that solves the problem of genetic diversity. Besides, we know that Africa is only inferred of being the continent of origin because of their fossil record, right? They find bones there and they say they must be older. And then when they find bones outside of Africa that are older, they just say, well, those are unevolved humans, right? They haven't evolved yet. They're not as evolved. So it's ironic that they have rescue devices for everything. We would say that the human population goes back to the three bases of Noah's daughter-in-law, L, M, and M haplogroups. And we would say that this happened about 4,500 years ago. And we can look inside of a book by Nathaniel Jensen called Traced. And what he did is he looked at the pedigree mutation rate studies, and he found that these had a very slow rate. And then these had a couple fast rates. So what he did is he noticed that the rate of testing was done very, very differently. And he found that the ones that had a really high fast mutation rate, these scanned the chromosome for more mutations a lot better. They had a high sweep rate. They scanned it multiple times looking for mutations. And when they scanned it, look what they noticed. The more they scanned it, the more mutations they found. And therefore, they got a faster mutation rate. So Nathaniel Jensen put that up there and said, okay, if we get 3 mutations per generation, what is the total amount of mutations in the entire population right now? What's the max? It's 440. So 440 divided by 3, you only get 146 generations until you land on Noah. That's not much. Using a generation time of 30 years is 4,380 years ago. 35-year generation time, 5,111 years ago. Very easy for us to answer, but it gets even better. When Nathaniel Jensen plotted it into the chart on that version of haplogroups exploding, we found that the haplogroups form right here on the 6th generation, which is Peleg's generation. Interesting. Exactly what we would expect to find. Remember, evolution would expect that we evolved in Africa. Therefore, the haplogroups should have probably been evolving here more than anywhere else in the world. Instead, look at where they form. Right out of the secular journal. Right out exactly where we'd expect using the Bible alone. Right out of the Tower of Babel region, all of the major haplogroups form right in this region and disperse. And when we look at where, look at that. These scientists confirm that the human genome began to rapidly diversify not more than 5,000 years ago. So that's right, everybody. They sat in Africa, in this gigantic continent that's the size of the US, China, India, Europe, Japan. All of these together is how big Africa is. So the map you see normally, that doesn't do it justice. Africa is massive, massive. And yet they couldn't invent any of those things there. They never figured it out, and they never diversified. Remember that. They just stayed in like these little cliques together for some reason, which also would cause haplogroups to form too, by the way. So it still doesn't work, but there you have it. And when we look in Africa, look at that. Only a couple haplogroups there. The flow is in, not out. And there's only a few. There's not very many. Why? Because this is the history right there. Very, very simple. Not confusing at all. And then what about the math? We find that early math started. We know that this is a mathematical calculation on a Sumerian tablet, and then we find it over in Egypt. But here's the interesting thing. When we look at pyramids on opposite sides of the world, look at this. Here's all the places that there's pyramids on this map everywhere. What's the interesting thing about them? They all brought the same math with them. They all used the millimeter to the millimeter. Think about that. How could that be possible with people that have never met each other to all invent the same exact mathematical system and bring that out and create pyramids using the same millimeter? It's game over, evolution. It really is. This is really what destroys it. We also found the 16 cities of Noah's grandsons because they were named after him, and the names still exist to this day. So what do we have? We have haplogroups forming out of the Middle East. We don't have them forming in Africa. We don't find very many there to begin with, and the flow seems to go into Africa, not out. The size of Africa is absolutely massive. So why is that? This is just not true. The oldest known medical or medicinal record of all goes back right to the time of there. Why? Because it's easy. We had medicine. We were all grouped together. We all brought it with each other. We wrote it down. What about flood stories? They originate in this area, and they flowed out from that region, and they just got more diluted as time went on. That's why these other flood stories have arcs that don't work, measurements that don't work, things that just don't really match up, but yet they still contain the base story around that. Then we have megalithic structures. We all started building megalithic structures around this at the same time, right after that. Why work with such hard material? Why would we bring that around with us? Why didn't we find them in Africa? What, we just left Africa and then we all got together in one little group and said, you know what, guys, let's start building homes and structures out of the hardest material we can find. Okay, split. Go. You go left. I'm going right. You're going bottom. I'm going, get out of here. I'll never see you again, but let's do this. We got this. It makes total sense. But it makes a lot of sense when you start with this Tower of Babel and the story that comes from there. And then we have the languages. They all sprout from one region and they all sprout up in different languages. We can't trace them backwards linguistically to a single root language, and it sure doesn't form in Africa, but we should find that if the story of evolution is true, African language should be first and everything should branch from it. That's exactly what we do not see. Well, what about genealogies? We can track genealogies back as well. They also go back. How come? How come we don't find unbroken chains, going back to the African stories that go back in Africa? Instead, look, the Ethiopian dates go back to the biblical history of people as well when you go in Africa. Why? What's going on? Why? They invented the story and then brought it with them to Babel? That makes no sense. Of course not. The genealogies are true because they're handed down from that region. What about brewing? Brewing didn't start in Africa. It started outside. So what? They're in Africa 2.8 million years, go through a bottleneck 200,000 years ago. Couldn't figure out how to ferment They never figured out that putting milk outside for one day ferments it, even though they drink milk there still to this day, and then make alcohol out of it, right? They couldn't figure that out either. Just absolutely lunacy. We get phenotypic diversity. It's very easily, when you explain it, branching off from a single group of people, but it sure doesn't make sense if you're in Africa the entire time, and then new humans like Asians and Europeans evolved only in the last few thousands of years. Doesn't make sense that we would go up into a region that Africa doesn't even have, like the Arctic freezing regions where blonde hair, blue-eyed people came from. All of a sudden, have the exact same phenotypic diversity of looks that Africans have. Oh my gosh. How about population growth rates? It's exactly the same that we would expect to find. How about in Africa? We get a net zero population growth rate over millions of years. That's just stupid. How about this? We get people everywhere. We get people living for millions of years that diversified, or is it more plausible that people diversified after a global ice age and went to the regions that were habitable, and then after Babel dispersed into the regions they were supposed to be in? Or is it more plausible to say, nah, humans have been around for 2.8 billion years, but this left no trace of their existence, just a couple campfires here and there? Come on, that's stupid too. And then it's easily solved. We have it here. The lack of fossils is called the hominin fossil gap paradox, is what we were talking about earlier. That's solved with our model as well. How about irrigation? Irrigation is something very simple that we do to irrigate crops and grow things, but yet they couldn't figure that out in Africa at all. They couldn't figure out how to grow a single crop when literally that's all they do now. Come on. How about mutation rates? That's right. We talked about that earlier. The single nucleotide variants arose 5,115 years ago. So humans weren't really mutating much before that, everybody. Don't worry about that. It was only recently that they really started getting the bad mutations. Before that, no big deal, no problem. So that's easily falsified on why Africans have more mutations. Then we have the population growth rate, right? Actually, I'm not sure what that picture is. Yeah, here we go. Genetic mutations being all of the same age. Why? Because it's pretty simple, right? If almost all animals emerged about the same time as humans, but that's answered very, very easily. The age for the most common ancestors all converge. That's it. It's really, really simple. They converge on one another in a very recent time in history. Very, very quick. Mathematics. Same region on Earth, same place. They took it and they used the same math to build temples everywhere on Earth. Everywhere they went, they used the same math. Why? Why didn't they invent math in Africa? What's going on? Why didn't they invent math there and then branch out and teach other people? And then the types of math changed over time because, things evolve. Well, it sure didn't evolve very much, did it, when making these megalithic structures? How about astronomy? Astronomy only goes back about the same time. Oh, look at that, right in the same place, too. Oh, wow. Why would that be? Well, maybe it happened because all the people knew about it in the same place and then took it with them as they branched out and brought it with them. How about archaeology? Same thing, right out of the Middle East. That's the roots of it. But yet they couldn't figure it out in Africa. Nope. Those animals were worthless there. They were very dumb animals. They couldn't figure out how to actually be used to do anything. That's how stupid they were. They even not only had dumb people, they had dumb animals too. So how about the helium and argon diffusion rates, which was brought up earlier? They put a limit on things. They go back to about 5,100 years ago. Expected. How zircon diffusion goes back about 6,000 years. How about the Mississippi Basin, which we were talking about earlier? Oh, that's easily. You can solve those by saying, they just decay in about 5,000 years, which is the observable rate of the collection and diffusion. Not around 20 million years ago. That's when evolution says it happened. But they have to use stories to use theirs. They have to invent their own math. What about the story of Babel itself? The story of Babel itself is everywhere. One of my favorites is in Hamel's journal. He was captured in Korea. And when the Koreans took him, he learned their language. And after he learned their language, he learned that they believe in a story of Babel, which was a group of people that dispersed from buildings, and then they created all of their own languages. And they had never met a Christian or a European ever. And they had the same exact story. that can only be true if the story of Babel is true, and people brought that with them. So it's not only that we find geographical global flood stories everywhere, we find the same thing of the Tower of Babel everywhere as well. So when people say, oh, well, it's just local floods creating those myths and legends between all these different people groups. Well, how in the world did they invent the same story of Babel in all the different people groups? What are you going to say there? You don't have the rescue device of saying it was a local flood. No, very, very simple. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to read all of this to people. I'll save you that one. So multiple independent lines of ancestry or of evidence all converge and point to the same location at the same time period. It answers all these different paradoxes, and the statistical probability when you run it is 10 to the 40th power. That would be like winning Powerball every week for an entire year straight to get that. So what does this solve? The sapien paradox, the fossil gap paradox, the sauropod, ancient ancestor paradox, all of them. We can answer all of those easily with just looking at what we did today. Very, very easy. And we continue to make more predictions. These are the predictions that we can make based on biblical young earth creation. We have them in print, and we've already nailed most of the other predictions already. And we've moved on to making new ones. So these are already confirmed. So these are not confirmed yet. So these are novel. And I'll leave it there because I'm just getting too amped up.
No, you keep going, Matt. This is too good, brother. You can't stop so abruptly. This is a knockout punch, a fatal blow to evolutionary theory. And what I love is the fact that the best the critics have to offer on these points, brother, are stories. But they fail to realize, or maybe they do deep down inside, stories aren't going to cut it. Stories aren't necessarily science. Okay, we get it. They have wild imaginations. Okay, but that doesn't equate a scientific rebuttal, brother. So feel free if you had to. I know you put a lot of work into these slides and pictures. So if you had a few more you wanted to go through.
I'll just go over one real quick because I noticed what time it is real quick, and I gotta go also. So I'll just go real quick over the taxonomic boundary paradox, where taxonomy and cladistics and phylogeny don't work anymore because evolution doesn't have boundaries. Taxonomy does. The reason why is because taxonomy was invented by a biblical creationist, and Linnaeus, he did not recognize humans alongside of apes with any type of evolutionary link. And so how would we answer this homology that answers taxonomy at the same time? Well, easy. The father of homology is a biblical creationist, and he also invented the nested hierarchical pattern we see based on Genesis, which talks about sea creatures and then birds and then land animals being made in an order. And he literally said, according to Owen, the archetype point to a deep and pregnant principle, some archetypal implore on which it is it has pleased the creator to frame certain of all his living things. So what happened is he said he created the term similarity due to common design. Darwin took that and he erased common design and he replaced it with common ancestry, and it duped everybody. And it's not true, of course. It actually is common design, but now everybody actually uses common ancestry based on Darwin, but he was hoping that nobody would actually notice that. It was a creationist prediction, and that's what it comes down to. Predictions. Is there discontinuity? There is. There is a taxonomic boundary paradox because evolution is not true. And they even admit, look at this, wherever we look in living biota, discontinuities are overwhelmingly frequent. These discontinuities are even more striking in the fossil record, with new species usually appear in the fossil record suddenly, not connected with their ancestors by a series of intermediaries. Oh, interesting. Why? Could it be that there's no in-between species like the genetic boundary study found? There absolutely isn't. There's independent lines of ancestry, and they do not converge going backwards in time to a common ancestor. This conclusion kept me up, or is very surprising, and I fought against it as hard as I could. That was what Thaler said in the 2018 Rockefeller University study. Genes that control the mouse eye color also happen to control the mouse's physical size. But at the same time, that same gene controls the fruit fly eye color, controls not the fruit fly size, but rather the female sex origin morphology. Like, what's going on? Look at this. These genes found in the silkworm are found also in the amphibian legs, and they make silk. What? They said, that's crazy. That totally breaks down genetic similarity because it's unlikely that they date back to a common ancestor. Well, I know, because it's common design. That's why it's keeping them up at night. That's why it's very easy to answer with our model. It's not easy to answer for them. This taxonomic boundary paradox, very easy. Answer. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped over a couple. Look at this one. Our knowledge of molecular processes is not good enough to definitively rule out independent origins. See, they had to invent convergent evolution to save them from this. But there is no theory holding that molecular similarity necessarily implies an evolutionary relationship. And any molecular data that conflicts or contradicts the idea of genetic similarity denotes relation is often dismissed. So isn't that ironic that they cherry pick cytochrome C to build their evolutionary tree, and then when they look at cytochrome B and it doesn't match cytochrome tree, they just disregard B altogether. They don't mix them together to see what it can form, because all of the regions that you look in form a different tree. So they cherry pick looking at one, and even that best one, which is cytochrome C by the way, literally breaks down after 3 steps. But we can cover that some other time. So what it is the taxonomic boundary paradox is solved because there is no boundary paradox to begin with. It's only a paradox for evolution, and evolution is wrong. And so when we look at this, look at this. We are more different genetically from people living 5,000 years ago than they were different from Neanderthals. Why? Because people living 5,000 years ago were brothers to Neanderthal. Neanderthal left and they went on their own way, and they started mutating crazy because they lived in small populations of like 20 people and then started inbreeding and having to live in harsh conditions. They hypermutated themselves to death. And so they look genetically different. Are they different? No, not really. Not back then anyway. So anyway, I should probably wrap it up. I'm already late.
It's too addicting.
It is.
Refuting evolution, confirming creation. And what's amazing is that is just a sneak preview. It's really just a teaser into the overall material and content that we have that's out there, refuting evolution, countering an old earth. Brother Matt Powell, that is, your slides and presentation on dinosaurs, dinosaur soft tissue, C14 and dinosaur fossils, and the evidence for man and dinosaur coexisting. Truly incredible evidence, gentlemen. Matt Powell, did you hear anything before we move into, I guess, the final portion of tonight, which will be a presentation from me, Matt Nailor? You basically got to get going because you got work.
See you guys.
Okay, God bless you.
See you,
God bless, brother.
See you, Matt. Take care.
Take care. Great presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, Matt too, I guess. Anything that jumped out at you from Matt that he was saying that was, it was all a fatal blow, knockout punch for sure, but anything in particular jump out at you?
I just think it's interesting that every field of science, whether it's paleontology or biology or geology, zoology, even biomimicry, all of these fields that we can examine all point to intelligent design and young earth creationism. And folks, I hope that you guys really enjoyed these couple of presentations. Donnie's going to jump into his here, I believe. And Donnie, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop, but I'm going to be tuning in. I'll probably still be in the chat, and my wife and I will watch the rest.
Triggering those evolutionists.
Yeah.
Hey, listen.
Definitely triggered.
Excellent work. We need to do more of these in 2025. That's for sure, because we have unlimited information to get through. And you and me, Matt, we're quite close to each other. Actually, me in Canada, you in the States. But to get to where you are, or you to get to where I am, wouldn't take very long at all. So what we're going to be doing in 2025, sneak preview to the audience, is we're going to meet up and we're going to do some in-person discussions either at the university that's closest to me or the university that's closest to you. And we're going to pose these students the C14 challenge, the genetic entropy challenge, the mitochondrial Eve challenge. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have some great content for 2025, brother.
It's going to be a good time. Can't wait. Well, anyways, all right, folks, you all take care. And Donnie, thanks again for having me on. It's always a blessing to see you, brother, and keep up the great work.
Okay. God bless you, brother Matt Powell. We will see you a little bit later. And okay, guys, it's been thorough. It's been comprehensive. Tonight we allowed Matt Nailor to go second in terms of his presentation, as he's been working hard putting together images, arguments, and slides to show you guys. And he has somewhere to be. So now we're going to wrap up the show with I've got about 30 to 45 minutes worth of presentation of my own to get through. And so we're going to get right into that right now. I do have some questions that I see here that we can get to when all is done, but get ready, because we've got even more irrefutable and undeniable evidence for creation and against evolution. And so I am going to screen share here, and I'm also going to keep the chat open on my end here from my phone, just to make sure everything's running smoothly, because earlier I glitched just for 10 seconds, and I know why. It's because over the Christmas break, I installed through a new tech company a more heavy-duty, sophisticated antivirus program. And with the settings that are on it, I am told that it may or may not slow down things on the computer. Generally, it's been pretty good, though, so I don't want to have to change anything if I don't have to. So we'll see here. I'll look at the chat periodically. You guys let me know that everything's coming in smooth. And so, okay, let's get into this. I'm excited, guys. Again, this is Creationists Assemble, myself, Matt Nailor, Matt Powell. We've been giving you a little bit of everything tonight. Genetics, biology, paleontology. Matt Powell gave an excellent presentation on dinosaurs. Touched on the biblical evidence for dinosaurs, getting into Behemoth, Leviathan. Just really good so far. Okay. The human genome confirms biblical history. Sydney Raptor, I see you and your objections. We'll get to those. Actually, we had some fun with those during our last program together, where we went into C14, the C14 issue. Okay, here we go. The human genome confirms biblical history. I want to go over some scriptures. The scripture is very clear that in the last days, there's going to be scoffers, there's going to be mockers that we are more than familiar with as we engage them every single day, and we love it. For every single scoffer, for every single comment that is anti-creation or that is attacking us, that increases my creationist power level by 1. And so over the years, I have compiled much in terms of a power level, a creationist power level. It's at about 1 billion now. So keep it coming. I do appreciate it. Andrew Cumming and I, he's one of my favorite critics. We disagree passionately and strongly, but I always enjoy a good discussion with Andrew. So the Bible is clear. It predicted 2,000 years ago that there would be people that come in the last days walking after their own lusts, denying 3 things. And I find it very interesting. It's very curious that the 3 things they deny are the 3 things that we constantly debate and engage critics on today. So, for example, here they deny the special creation and saying, these are the scoffers, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Is that interesting? Uniformitarianism right there. Present processes today are the key to understanding the past. And therefore, what we have is a denial of the special creation event and the flood. For this, they willingly are ignorant. In the Greek, that means dumb on purpose. That by the word of God, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So there's your Genesis flood right there. The critics, the scoffers in the end times will be ignorant of that. And we find ourselves even engaging professing Christians on that issue, theistic evolutionists, for example, who deny a worldwide flood. Notice the third event that they deny. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. That would be the coming judgment by fire, the end times. So they deny those three things. To briefly refute the local flood idea, nobody would disagree with the fact that the special creation event would be universal. Okay, that was the creation of everything, time, matter, space. The coming judgment by fire is not just localized to a certain city in the States, okay, coming to a city near you, and that's it. No, this is a worldwide judgment by fire. And so for the local flooders, those that deny a Genesis flood, they say the Genesis flood is local. Why would the middle event that scoffers deny, why in the world would that not be global? Okay, if the special creation was universal and so is the coming judgment by fire, then right here, the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. This would also have to be global. It would have to be worldwide. Okay, because there's no hermeneutical justification for saying that the second event that the critics deny is local, but the other two are worldwide or universal. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Right there, you have time, matter, and space, which have to come into existence at the same time from an outside force. In the beginning, there's time. God, that's the who, created the heaven and the earth. There's matter and space, all coming to existence at the same time. So we have significant implications for those that want to deny a first Adam, a literal Adam and Eve. Okay. If there was no first Adam, then what is the necessity of the last Adam? If Adam did not really exist, then why did Jesus die for the sins of the world? And so we're going to show here that the scripture is very clear that God created two original people, Adam and Eve, and they were created special and independent from any form of life, any other form of life. That includes chimpanzees, whales, that includes banana plants. Matthew 19:4, and he answered and said unto them, have ye not read? This is Jesus speaking, that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female. That's referring back to Adam and Eve. And he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? In this important passage, Jesus is clearly saying that the creation of Adam and Eve was at the beginning, the creation week. Again, Mark 10:6, same thing. But from the beginning of creation, clearly speaking to the creation week, it doesn't have to be the very first thing that God does. Okay. The first thing I do when I get up in the morning is have a coffee. I love coffee, but that's not the exact first thing that I do. Okay. I can get up, wash my face, brush my teeth, have a drink of water, have breakfast, get my clothes on, then have a coffee. But it's still at the beginning of my day. Okay. So yes, God created Adam and Eve on day 6, which is at the beginning. It is in the creation week, the beginning of all things. 1 Corinthians 15:45. This is the Apostle Paul speaking. And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. So clearly the New Testament authors, Jesus Christ himself, God manifest in the flesh, believed in the first man, Adam. Genesis 3:20, and Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of some living. No, all living. So you have at the beginning, God creating two people, Adam and Eve. They are the ancestors of every single person that exists on the planet today that have ever existed. You see no hint at evolution. You see no hint at common descent here. Okay. Exodus 20, verse 11. Do you believe what this says? It's not about, well, what do you think this means? No, it's, do you believe what this says? For in 6 days, the Lord made heaven and the earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. That's everything. That includes Adam, Eve, the animals, the planets, the sun, the earth. Genesis 2:7. There are some Very powerful implications here in the world of science. This is why genetics has rediscovered Genesis. Genesis and the history of the universe is found in the Bible, but genetics has actually confirmed or verified the account of origins in Genesis. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. He didn't evolve from pre-human creatures. He didn't evolve from hominins, Australopithecines, okay, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. That's Adam, the special creation of Adam. Genesis 2:21-22. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. So Adam and Eve created, special and independent from any other form of life. That includes, again, chimpanzees, banana plants, whales, grasses. Genesis 5:2, male and female created he them. I mean, the scriptures can't be any more clear. Jesus, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, looking back to the special creation of Adam and Eve, Eve being the mother of all living, again, Adam, the first man. Okay. Is there scientific evidence? Does the genetic data confirm or verify what the Bibles clearly teach? The answer is yes, profoundly yes. There is no point in us working hard to compromise God's word with really bad pseudoscientific theories. We don't need to reinterpret what these verses are clearly telling us, that Adam and Eve are the first two human beings, and Genesis, again, claiming to be the history book of the universe, because the scientific data has actually confirmed what the Bible says here. And so there are several lines of evidence here for the Bible's account of origins, and I am going to touch on at least a few of them. Mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Adam/Noah. We'll touch a little bit on genetic entropy, and we probably will have a little bit of time to touch on design diversity. Okay, so firstly, I want to show everybody what the evolutionary model believes, the alternative hypothesis here. They would say, firstly, they would reject independent origins or separate ancestry, which the Bible is clearly teaching. They believe all life, including strawberries, whales, human beings, banana plants, they believe they're all related. All plants, all animals go back to a single-celled like ancestor billions of years ago, which came from non-living chemicals, and everything came from an expansion billions of years ago with the Big Bang. So here's another example of the evolutionary tree. You got fish, you have marsupials, chimpanzees, crustaceans, millipedes, all going back to a common ancestor. Okay. Now, what the Bible teaches and what the scientific data confirms and supports is the separate ancestry model that you can see here, where you've got humans being their own separate created kind. They are unique and separate from any other form of life. We can stay as close to home as possible and refute common descent. Okay. If I can show that humans and chimpanzees are not related through common ancestry using empirical scientific data, then that means humans and strawberries or humans and pine trees are definitely not related through common ancestry. And so let's stay as close to home as possible and refute this notion that humans and chimpanzees go back to a common ancestor. Now, nobody denies change over time. So if by evolution you mean change over time or changes in allele frequencies, allele, what's that? An allele is a genetic variant, and frequency, of course, is the frequency that a specific genetic variant occurs in a population. Okay, the percentage in terms of the frequency can change over time. Yeah, these are horizontal changes in the genome, horizontal changes in morphology, adaptation, okay? Selection, it's not a creative mechanism. It keeps a species as strong as it can be. It's a fine-tuning mechanism, okay? And so if that's what you mean by evolution, change over time, my thinking changes over time, phones change over time, computers, cars, things change over time. No one's going to deny that. That's a simple definition. But if by evolution and by change over time, you mean the evolution of new body plans, new creatures, the evolution of new life forms, then we're going to have something to disagree with, because that's going to require what's called vertical changes. So if by evolution you mean dogs, wolves, dingoes can be traced back to a common ancestor, then we're not going to have a problem. But if by evolution you mean dogs, wolves, banana plants, flowers, whales go back to a common ancestor, well, that's where we need to debate the issues. Okay. And so the evolutionists, they think time. Well, with enough time, you can get, as long as it doesn't contradict physics, physical limits, you could basically get anything, fish to fishermen, particles to people, bacteria-like organisms to biologists over time. Because they'll say, well, don't you see change every generation? When cows produce cows, aren't those cows that are produced just a little different than the previous generation? Aren't your kids just a little different than you? Every generation, differences accumulate. And so just give it enough time. Richard Dawkins likes to say, give it enough time, give it millions of years. Those microevolutionary changes can amount to large-scale macroevolutionary changes, because they define macroevolution as changes at or above the species level. The problem is what we observe are strictly horizontal changes. Okay, the majority of mutations are deleterious. The rare beneficial mutations that happen, which are about 1 in a million, are typically reductive and functionally compromising to organisms. Okay, so usually they're breaking down pre-existing systems. Things are breaking. It's easier to break a gene than to build one up. And so more time actually equals more degeneration, more extinction, more deleterious mutation accumulation. So more time is worse for evolution. You could have 1 trillion years and you're still not going to take your fish to fishermen. Okay, here's a couple sources showing that evolutionists look to the source of all genetic variations being mutations over time. Creationists and evolutionists have two very different explanations for the origin of genetic diversity. Creationists look to what's called design diversity. Okay, design diversity suggests that God would have front-loaded the original created kinds, including humans, with pre-existing DNA differences. In technical terms, this is created heterozygosity. They would have been created in a state of DNA diversity. This goes back to basic genetics and alleles, right? If you're capital A, lowercase a, capital B, lowercase b, you're genetically heterozygous. If you're capital A, capital A, capital B, you're genetically homogeneous. Well, you know what? God said to be fruitful and multiply. It wouldn't make any sense for that command to be carried out through cloning. And that would be the case if God created Adam and Eve genetically homogeneous with no pre-existing diversity. No, front-loading Adam and Eve in the original created kinds with these pre-existing functional DNA differences makes sense both theologically and scientifically. That means with processes like recombination, which scrambles up these genetic differences every single generation as the chromosomes line up, crossover takes place, and you get scrambled versions of the chromosomes, right? Biparentally inherited DNA would be the autosomal nuclear DNA that you inherit from your parents. One chromosome, one from mom, one chromosome, one from dad. Okay, 50% DNA from mom, 50% DNA from dad. So in a single generation, you can get incredible diversity, novel chromosomal combinations, because those DNA differences are built in. So you don't need millions of years to build up the necessary amount of diversity through mutation accumulation to produce variation. No, that variation can be front loaded. So as you can see here, mutation and human exceptionalism, our future genetic load. Again, the majority of mutations, the mutation rate's high, 100 new mutations per person per generation, with most of those being slightly deleterious. That means they're invisible to selection. Selection can't see them. They build up over time, much like rust on a car, much like single spelling mistakes in a book the size of an encyclopedia. On their own, they're inconsequential. But over time, they build up. They ruin the message of the book. They destroy the car. And in terms of biological organisms, organisms descend more and more into genetic sickness due to the accumulating genetic load. This is harmful and detrimental to species. As a matter of fact, it puts shelf lives on genomes. Because if species cannot persist for millions of years into the future, they certainly could not have persisted for millions of years into the past. Okay. And so this demands young biology, both extant and extinct. Mutations are overwhelmingly deleterious. The vast majority of mutations are deleterious. This is one of the most well-established principles of evolutionary genetics, supported by both molecular and quantitative genetic data. Okay, so let's get into specific predictions or expectations of the Adam and Eve model, what we just read and showcased for several minutes there in Genesis and also in the New Testament. So Adam and Eve predictions: low genetic diversity, one Y chromosome ancestor, one mitochondrial DNA ancestor. Here's a few. These biblical creationist expectations have been confirmed. Again, the human genome is incredible evidence for Adam and Eve. We're going to get into each one of these. So low genetic diversity. Well, there's two different models, the evolutionary model of human origins and then the creationist model. If God created just two people, Adam and Eve, as the Bible says, thousands of years ago, not hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, what that would do is restrict levels of genetic diversity. That's because you're starting with two. That would automatically restrict the levels of genetic diversity you could have. Rather than with animals, the Bible is clear that God created animals in bulk. He created them in populations and fully working and functioning ecosystems. So you'd expect more diversity, higher levels of diversity, okay, overall. The evolutionary model, if we've been evolving for hundreds of thousands to millions of years, if you want to go back to the Australopithecines, up to Homo habilis, and then Erectus, who apparently lived on the globe for 1 to 2 million years, and then eventually evolved both outside and inside of Africa to the different hominin variations like Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, Heidelbergensis, Floresiensis, Naledi, so on and so forth. We can get into that human evolution from the fossil record. Mutations, they're adding something every time they accumulate because they're adding something that was not previously there. So you're adding genetic diversity every generation. That means if human evolution is true, the evolutionary story, there should be higher levels of genetic diversity because over hundreds of thousands to millions of years, you're going to have a lot of genes floating around these populations. So two very different predictions: creation model, low genetic diversity. The evolutionary model, higher levels of genetic diversity. What do we find? Well, notice every single human being on the planet is nearly identical genetically. That goes for autosomal nuclear DNA. That goes for uniparentally inherited DNA like mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome. Y chromosome is uniparentally inherited DNA. It's also nuclear DNA, but it's passed down on one line, the father's line. Very low genetic variation in all DNA compartments. Notice this, genetic variation from the secular literature. Human genetic diversity is substantially lower than that of many other species, including our nearest evolutionary relative, the chimpanzee. Exactly what we'd expect. Animal species, higher levels of genetic diversity. They were created in bulk. And humans, lower levels of genetic diversity. Based on an examination of our DNA, any two human beings are 99.9% identical. Let me read that again. Any two human beings are 99.9% identical. So evolutionists looked at this and said, well, we must have originated from a small ancestral population because we're all basically the same. Our genetic diversity is much lower than ever expected, ever predicted. That's why the evolutionary community, they didn't predict this, they didn't expect it, but what they did, rather than tapping out, as this confirms the Bible's account of origins, they invented a fairy tale story, post hoc, ad hoc, after the fact, to explain the data. Right here from the National Human Genome Research Institute, all humans are 99.9% identical in their genetic makeup. So this isn't really contested. This is well known. The Human Genome Project has helped to inform us about how remarkably similar all human beings are, 99.9% at the DNA level. Fascinating. The evolutionary rescue devices don't work. So they'll say, well, Okay, in order to reduce levels of heterozygosity and increase levels of homozygosity, in order to erode this genetic diversity that would be there in a hominin population, okay, a couple 100,000 years ago, is there was an out of Africa population bottleneck, a near extinction event. And so you have Erectus on the globe for 1 to 2 million years. Numbers vary, okay, because it doesn't support the evolutionary story. So there's a lot of guesswork, but perhaps there were 1 million Homo erectus. Eventually in Africa, Homo erectus evolves into Homo sapiens, and then there's a near extinction event. That population, whatever it was, is reduced rapidly to somewhere between 2 and 10,000. Some say 30,000. Okay, that's a near extinction event. Then that population has to remain small in Africa for an extended period of time because they need enough time to erode that genetic diversity to roughly to where it is today, because today it's too low for the evolutionary model. The problem with that is inbreeding. Inbreeding reveals the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes. And there would be a lot of genetic mistakes accumulated. There'd be a lot of deleterious mutations in recessive form. And so what this would do to that population of 2 to 10,000, even 30,000, is it would accelerate genetic degeneration. Diseases would become manifested. That population would be incredibly genetically compromised. And we're supposed to believe that that population of 2 to 10,000 or 30,000 suddenly in a genetically compromised, highly diseased state, highly inbred state, leaves Africa, spreads out into all parts of the globe, sees dominion over the planet, invents computers, cars, the space shuttle, out of a near extinction event. Again, this is a post hoc, ad hoc invention. It's not even remotely feasible because, again, unlike the biblical creation bottlenecks, it's not a 1 generation bottleneck. It's not a 2 generation bottleneck. It is a multiple generation bottleneck, and that's what they need anyways to erode genetic diversity. And so their main rescue device doesn't work. There's no real good evidence for it. So the fact is, we find low genetic diversity. If the Bible's account of human origins is true, that's what we'd expect to find. So we don't need to do any retrofitting of the data. What we find is exactly what we expected to find. So there's no post hoc, ad hoc, imaginative, far-fetched mental inventions. No, we don't need that. Okay, next piece of evidence, the real Eve, the mother of all living. This goes back to the scriptures that I begun this presentation with that talked about Eve being the mother of all living. Well, firstly, we're going to need to discuss DNA. Okay. The genome is basically the encyclopedia that makes you, that makes you human. Okay. We have 46 chromosomes. We inherit 50% from mom, 50% from dad. So again, 1 chromosome 1 from mom, 1 chromosome 1 from dad, 1 chromosome 2 from mom, 1 chromosome 2 from dad. There's recombination and gene conversion. And so you get scrambled genetic variability each generation. This is why hypothetically, any 2 people, they could have, if they could live long enough, if it was possible, they could have 1 million kids, and every single kid would be different genetically because we actually have built-in heterozygosity. Okay. So here's your chromosomes. Again, you have biparentally inherited DNA. You got 22, but then you got your sex chromosomes. Okay. Your Y chromosome, you're a man if you're XY, you're a woman if you're XX. Very simple. Only the man gets the Y chromosome. But there's another DNA compartment. Okay, there is the mitochondrial DNA. That's only inherited from the mother's side. It is also uniparentally inherited DNA, but it's not nuclear DNA like the Y chromosome. It actually exists outside of the nucleus in an organelle called the mitochondria. If you remember the science basics in high school, typically the mitochondria is referred to as the cell's power plant. This piece of DNA controls the conversion of sugars into energy. It creates ATP, And in each cell, you have many little, the number ranges from hundreds to thousands, but you have many little mitochondria that produce energy for us to live, for us to breathe. Very important DNA. You couldn't live without it. And this energy that is produced sustains life, and it also sustains our bodily functions, sustains our organs. Okay. And so we can take all the mitochondrial DNA in the world. We can look at them. We've done this. We can look at them, compare them, and build a family tree that points us right back to what? A single female ancestor. What did we read in Genesis? Eve is the mother of all living. This is biblical creationist expectations. Okay. There's been many pedigree studies done. Matt went into all of that, the pedigree studies that take us right back to Eve just roughly 6,000 years ago. The Parsons paper is a big one. Okay. Mutation rate much faster than expected. But here's what I really want to focus on. The fact that Eve is known. Let me say that again. Eve is known. There's no guessing. We know what Eve sequence is. We have biblical Eve sequence, and this is fascinating data. This is why you're getting tonight the most up-to-date presentation, data, evidence for special creation that exists. Guys, we know Eve. So if you take all the mitochondrial DNA in the world, it's a smaller DNA compartment. It's only about 16,000 letters roughly. What you can do is line them up. Dr. Rob Carter did this here in a secular journal. This is a secular research study, nucleic acids research. Search the paper yourself, mitochondrial diversity within modern human populations. And so what you do is you line up the mitochondrial DNA. And when you do so, you realize that 85% of the letters, everyone in the world, the DNA letters, everyone in the world has the exact same letter. What that means is there's low genetic variation. Worldwide mitochondrial DNA is nearly identical. It's the same. Okay. There's not a lot of mutations. There's not a lot of diversity. And so that means, let's say everyone in the world had an A at a specific genetic location. Okay. And then one person has a T. Well, what did Eve have? Well, Eve would have had an A. Okay. It's pretty easy to figure out. And an illustration could be if I wrote a book. So I had the original book, and then I made 30 copies of that book and gave it to 30 different people and told them to copy out that book by hand a bunch of times. Okay. Well, because of human error, just like mutations or errors in the nucleotide sequence of DNA, ATCG. Okay. And so in a book, it's a typographical error, could be akin to that. So you hand out all these different books that I wrote, let's say, and people copy those out. Well, you're going to get those books, take those books back. Okay. And let's say the original book that was wrote went missing. Well, each copy that somebody wrote out, there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be deviants. Well, what you can do is go through all those books, take out the rare deviants, because the majority of those books and letters and words are going to be the same. So take out the rare deviants, the mistakes, you can tell what they are, remove them from the equation. And then what you're left with is the original manuscript, the original book. And so that's what we have. We have the original sequence of Eve. It's called the Eve consensus sequence. What we have, what we know about it matches biblical expectations. This is what we would expect if the genome was young. Notice this, the worldwide human mitochondrial DNA consensus is composed of 16,569 nucleotides. Based on this current data set, 84.1% of the mitochondrial genome is invariant. So what that means is it's all the same, basically. Very low genetic diversity. And we all have the same mitochondrial DNA. The world consensus sequence is unambiguous except for a very few nucleotide positions. But remember, this is maternally inherited DNA. So it's only passed down on the mother's side. That's why the mitochondrial DNA going back on the female side to a single ancestor is so important, because the male inherited DNA, the Y chromosome, also goes back to a single male ancestor of all men on the planet. Mitochondrial DNA of all women on the planet. okay, because it's passed down on the mother's side. So for example, Eve would have children, her children would have children, their children would have children. And every time a mutation accumulates, it'd create a new branch on a family tree. You can track those back to a single woman. You could do the same thing with the Y chromosomal DNA. Okay, mitochondrial diversity within modern human populations. That's the paper. I recommend checking it out. Fascinating evidence for Eve. So have a look at this, this visual right here. These are basically just counts of sequences, okay? So this is important. These are counts of sequences. Most people differ from each other by about 22 mutations. So again, any two people on the planet, you're going to differ by about somewhere between 20 and 25, maybe 30. That's your mean. Okay. Now there are some groups like over here that are more divergent. Okay. Somewhere between maybe 100 or 120, but still very low. Not a large number of mutations at all, which speaks to the youth of the genome. And so if we compare everybody on the planet to Eve, the Eve consensus sequence, most people are just within a few differences from Eve, which makes sense. We've only been accumulating mutations. We've only been changing in terms of our DNA for a few thousand years. That's why we're so close to Eve's mitochondrial DNA sequence. All right. Now check out this visual. In a small fraction of the letters, you see variation. Okay. Since what? About 85% of the mitochondrial genome is identical. But if the genome were very old, you'd expect to find many more mutated sequences, but you don't find. These are the smaller bars here. Okay. For example, we see when most people have an A, right? Again, ATCG. Let's see when we see most people have an A, but some people have a T. Or when most people have a G, only a few have a C. Okay. So those are rare. When there's variation, it's rare since most people are identical in mitochondrial DNA. But if deep time evolution were true, we should be finding a lot more mutated sequences. We should find many more mutations. Let's say if we looked at position number 500, okay, in the mitochondrial DNA, one person could have an A. If evolution was true, another person could have a T, somebody could have a C, and another person could have a G. We see a lot of variation, a lot of mutations taking place. Highly mutated sequences, but we don't see this. And this all indicates very powerfully a young genome. We find very low genetic variation simply because the genome is young, it's not old, and it certainly doesn't share a common ancestor with the chimpanzees, because it turns out that the chimpanzee mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome are vastly different. So here's a phylogenetic tree. This is a mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree. Another incredible line of evidence for special creation and the Adam and Eve model from Genesis is the fact that what you see here is one woman. Okay, but you find irregular mutation rates. This breaks the assumptions behind the evolutionary molecular clock. So let's look at, so these branches represent DNA differences. This is basically random mutations in people groups over time. There's people here. HVR, most common haplogroup in Europe. You'll notice that the branches, which reflect DNA differences or mutations, they're differing in size. Well, what does that mean? That means some people are picking up more mutations in the same amount of time than their cousins, right? Because they go back to a common ancestor here. And so the mutation rate is generally high in the mitochondrial DNA. It's somewhere between 0.1 and 0.5 per generation. You might think, oh, that's low. No, it's not low, because the mitochondrial genome is very small. It's only about 16,500 letters. Your Y chromosome is about 60 to 65 million letters. And even in the Y chromosome, there's very little genetic variation. So we have one woman, low genetic variation, irregular mutation rates, which breaks any kind of potential evolutionary clock, because your pedigree method, that's basically your observable mutation rate. Matt talked about this. Let's say you take grandmother, mother, daughter, count up the differences in the mitochondrial DNA, and what you get is a fast mutation rate. A lot faster than the phylogenetic rate or the evolutionary rate, okay, substitution rate. But the problem is there's what's called fixation equilibrium, There's the fact, and Fatuma talks about this, famous population geneticist, okay, respected by evolutionists. The neutral mutation rate equals, in an evolutionary time scale, the neutral mutation rate equals your substitution rate. So when evolutionists say, oh, well, that we don't like the observed mutation rate, you got to look at the substitution rate or the phylogenetic rate. What they don't understand is that in long-term evolutionary timescales, the neutral mutation rate equals the fixation rate. Okay. But they'll try and twist it because they believe the majority of the genome is junk and non-functional, and selection is, they give unlimited powers to selection, basically. So they're going to say, well, that's just the absolutely neutral mutation rate, because even nearly neutral or effectively neutral mutations are eventually going to be seen by selection as they build up. No, that's their assumptions. That's their evolutionary philosophy. Okay. They need to prove that because these are assertions. Population genetics as a whole is very theoretical. There's a lot of guesswork. There's a lot of magic going on that doesn't fit what we see in the real world. So again, your observed mutation rate is fast, and it turns out that your observed mutation rate equals the long-term substitution rate. So their counters don't work. We find irregular mutation rates. We find low genetic diversity, fast mutation rates. So Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, this is his phylogenetic tree. Another expectation. Remember, Eve, we read earlier, Eve was formed from Adam's rib. Okay. Now we don't expect because of that human beings would lack a rib. It'd be like if my finger got cut off, my kids are not going to lack a finger. Okay. Because that wouldn't be inherited. So yeah, one of Adam's ribs was removed to make Eve, but their kids would have that rib back. That's not something that's inherited. Anyway, so Eve created specially, supernaturally from one of Adam's ribs. Then we'd expect two versions of DNA. And that's what we find. In the majority of cases, there are exceptions, of course. We have explanations for that. But in the majority of cases, most genes come in two variants. There's an expectation. Low genetic diversity, there's an expectation. One woman of whom we've all descended from, the mother of all living, there's a biblical expectation. One man, Y chromosomal Noah to be specific. See, here's the thing. The reason why we have one Y chromosome is because Noah, he passed on his Y chromosome to his sons. Tell me if this makes sense. You got Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They are related. They're brothers. They got their Y chromosome from Noah. So we'd expect a single Y chromosome, and yet that's what we find. Now, there might have been a mutation or two in there, of course. We don't really know for sure. And then Noah's Y chromosome probably didn't mutate all that much from Adam's. So it is Noah's. It is one Y chromosome, but it's probably not that different from Adam's. When it comes to mitochondrial DNA, you have Noah's wife, but then you've got, she probably didn't have any more kids. Bible doesn't really say, it's kind of silent, but I would say she probably didn't. And then Noah, his three sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, they had three wives. So it's all going to depend on how related were they. Were two of them sisters, perhaps? Were none of them sisters? It's hard to tell. Okay, so you'd expect more in terms of mitochondrial DNA, and yet what we find fits biblical expectations. Again, we see what? Three major haplogroups right here. L, M, and N. And I like to point out, because the critics like to say, oh, these trees, like for example, these trees are unrooted. Yeah, because the second you root them, you're basing that root, whether creationists or evolutionists, off many assumptions, built-in assumptions that oftentimes can't be verified or proven or demonstrated. So unrooted trees give the most natural reading of the data. Evolutionists don't like the natural reading of the data. They want to make evolutionary assumptions. They want to root it on the African line. Okay. They want to say African populations are older and non-Africans came from Africa and so on and so forth. So many assumptions there. Okay. This is the most natural reading of the data. Notice this, three major haplogroups. Those aren't even contested or disputed. L, M, and N. Well, we have Noah, his wife, their three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their three wives. So the Bible says that from these three people, from Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives, was the earth overspread or dispersed. So every single person today came from those 3 couples. And yet, what do we find? 3 major haplogroups, L, M, and N. Could that be Noah's 3 daughters-in-law? Could be. There's certainly no problem with that with us creationists, because that's what we'd expect. Okay. What about the real Adam? Well, it's the same thing. Y chromosome is uniparentally inherited DNA. We would expect 1 Y chromosome, as we said. Shem, Ham, and Japheth would have Noah's Y chromosome. And that's what we find. Take every single male Y chromosome on the planet today, and it can be traced to a single Y chromosomal ancestor in the not so distant past. There's very low genetic variation. Here's the thing. If we've been evolving for hundreds of thousands to millions of years, let's say a couple 100,000 years, let's give them their out of Africa story. And then people groups spread out into different parts of the globe. Okay, well, what would happen is they would start accumulating their own Y chromosomal differences because they're now isolated from each other. So we should find highly divergent Y chromosomes on the planet, but we don't. We find a single Y chromosome, low genetic variation. We also find geographically specific Y chromosomes, Chinese Y chromosomes, African Y chromosomes, Australian Y chromosomes, European Y chromosomes. This fits the Tower of Babel model, because once the languages are confused and people start spreading out into all parts of the globe, they're only evolving for a few thousand years to get to today. Okay. And to get to the amount of people today, all you would need to do is extremely easy. There should be more people if evolution is true. After the flood, you have 8 people. I think it's every 150 years, 150 or 154 years. All you have to do is double the population. Double the population every 150 years and you'll get what we have today. Very easy. It's trivial. So you have 8, then you have 16. Okay. And then do the math from there. Now, when it comes to the geographically specific Y chromosomes, it fits the Tower of Babel. Allele frequencies in general fit the Tower of Babel dispersal. You have rare mutations like blue eyes, for example, due to a mutation, but they're isolated to specific people groups. Okay. Which speaks of that dispersal event after the Tower of Babel. But if there was a spreading out 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, 70,000 years ago, you'd expect more diversity, more mutations. Those geographically specific Y chromosomes would be more divergent, but they're not. This all points to the Tower of Babel. It points to Y chromosome Noah, and ultimately points to Adam, the first man. So here is a Y chromosome family tree now. And just like we did with the mitochondrial DNA, we can build a family tree of Y chromosomes around the world. It's been done, and they go back to a central point. They go back to a single Y chromosomal ancestor. We know that the Y chromosome mutation rate is high. It's about 1 to 3 per generation, which is incredibly high. And there's only 200-300 roughly generations of mutations that have accumulated that you can see here on this Y chromosome family tree. And so humans, the data suggests humans have only existed for a few thousand years, 6,000 to be exact. If you want to go back to Adam, this would go back to Noah. And so the point is, genetics is not a friend to evolution. So in the Y chromosome, low variation, fast mutation rate, and one man. And the real fatal blow, these are all fatal blow. One thing before we get to this, the argument for mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Noah, the rescue devices don't work. The evolutionists want to say, well, mathematically, now remember, this wasn't predicted. This is post hoc ad hoc. So, they got to come up with a rescue device or a rescue mechanism. They'll say, well, mathematically, you're going to get 2 lineages anyways, because eventually people are going to converge into one. No, that actually is not expected, because if the evolutionary model is true, you wouldn't have what's called random mating, for one. You'd have people groups that are spread out. Okay. At some point with the hominins, you have hominins that are spread out in Australia, Europe, Asia. So you're not going to have random mating. Historically, you have people in families, in tribes, in civilizations that are intermarrying within themselves. Yeah, there'd be some crossover, but the rule was no random mating. Tribes are sticking with their tribes. You're not going to have random mating between Australia and, let's say, Africa. Okay, so what you'd actually expect with that is many lineages, many mitochondrial DNA lineages, many Y chromosomal lineages. So no, we would not expect to find one mitochondrial DNA lineage, one Y chromosome DNA lineage. Those are biblical expectations. We don't have to retrofit any kind of data. We don't have to invent any rescue devices or rescue mechanisms, because this fits like a glove. Remember, going back now, probably over 30 minutes, the Bible describes the special creation of Adam and Eve. They're created separate and independent from any other form of life. That includes chimpanzees, apples, banana plants. And yet, what do we find in our genetics? Genetics confirms biblical Adam and Eve. Genetics has discovered the Tower of Babel, the flood. Okay. Another major issue, too, is they have 2 out of Africas to explain the data, because humans leave Africa. Who do they find? Neanderthals. They find other people groups, Denisovans, and we have Neanderthal DNA. What does that mean? Well, it means we interbred with them. We intermarried. We produce fertile offspring. That's how we have their genes. Okay. Get a DNA test. You could be part Neanderthal. So we were fertile with them. We could produce viable offspring. So they have to say, well, Neanderthals got there, and then other groups like Heidelbergensis, some of these islanders like Hobbit, Luzonensis, Naledi was found in a cave. So they'll say, well, Homo erectus, being a smart hominin, left Africa first. So a group of erectus left Africa, some stayed in Africa, which evolved into Homo sapiens. Outside of Africa, they evolved independently into groups like Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, Denisovans, okay, to name a few. Now, what this means is you have all these different hominins accumulating their own mutations in mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. And then we leave Africa, humans leave Africa, modern Homo sapiens, and meet up with these hominins and even interbreed and intermarry with them. This would produce all kinds of crazy things in terms of mitochondrial DNA diversity. So no, it's not an expectation, which is why it wasn't predicted. And I challenge any evolutionist to show me a prediction before this data was discovered, where they say, well, this would be what the Bible describes in terms of human origins. That's what we would expect. And it doesn't mean the Bible's account of origins is true. I want to see a prediction like that. You're not going to find it. Maybe you will. Okay, I haven't read every single paper out there, but I doubt it. This is all post hoc, ad hoc. These are rescue devices. You would expect a lot more diversity. You would expect more lineages. Some human lineages could even share Y chromosomes with chimpanzees. Since we're breaking away from a common source population, okay, we have different groups going different ways, experiencing different mutational events, different population histories. So if the evolutionary model were true, there could have been so many different outcomes. There could have been a variety of different outcomes. But if biblical creation is true, well, there's only one outcome. One man, one woman. Tower of Babel and the flood. There's not many different possibilities. And yet all of these are true. These have all been confirmed. They didn't have to be. Then we'd have a problem on our hands. This is why it's a great time to be a biblical creationist. So no, their rescue devices don't work. Truthfully, if evolution were true, there should be many different lineages. And that's not what we find. Okay, just looking at the chat quickly, make sure everything's good. Okay, looks like it's good. So we're going to start winding things down here with this. So as we can see, in terms of humans, we find one man, right? Adam, the first man. We find Eve, the mother of all living. We've discovered the Tower of Babel. We've discovered the flood. Genetics, low diversity. Overall, low diversity in the Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA, too few DNA differences if we've been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years. two main lineages, both male and female. Most genes come in two versions. Geographically specific Y chromosomes. Okay, these are just a few. Population growth fits in line with biblical creationist expectations. Now, let's assume, okay, are we related to chimpanzees? Do we go back to a common ancestor? Well, again, all human male Y chromosomes are nearly identical. We bring in the chimpanzee, and guess what? Nothing alike. Bring in the chimpanzee for mitochondrial DNA, nothing alike. Incredible differences, massive differences. So notice this visual. You have the chimpanzee Y chromosome. Again, Y chromosome is uniparentally inherited DNA. It's only inherited on the father's side. So I have my dad's Y chromosome. My two sons have my Y chromosome. XY means you're a man. XX means you're a woman. Mitochondrial DNA, for example, that's only passed down on the mother's side. So that's why when we read the Bible and we see that we have Eve, the mother of all living that God created, and then we have Adam, the first man, we look to genetics and we need to think to ourselves, okay, what type of DNA, what DNA compartments should we look to see if what the Bible is describing is true scientifically? Well, again, we would look to those uniparentally inherited DNA compartments, and that's what we've done, and we've discovered literally Adam and Eve. So chimpanzee Y chromosome, you'll notice it here. This is comparing the great apes because they believe that humans are human great apes taxonomically. That's evolutionist. So you can compare the chimpanzee Y to the human Y. When you consider overall gene content, size differences, and architecture, it turns out that the human Y, and as of 2024, it's even more different. It's less than 30% the same. 30%. Every single male Y chromosome in humans is nearly identical, 99.9% the same. But then you bring in the chimpanzee, our supposed closest cousin, and it's less than 30% the same. Maybe it's because evolution isn't true. Notice the heterochromatin here in the light gray. This is all color coded. So heterochromatin, it's a important piece of DNA. It's densely packed. It comprises repetitive sequences like satellite DNA. Okay, you'll notice that it's basically absent. This here is absent in the chimpanzee Y. Where did it go? You'll notice this fits created kind's expectation, right? Chimpanzee and bonobo Y chromosomes, a little bit of difference, but still basically the same. Okay, there's not a huge amount of differences that can't be accounted for. Like it's mostly loss. But the human Y, you actually, if you're going to say that chimpanzees and humans are also related with the bonobos, then you're going to have to explain not only gene loss, but also gene addition. This is why I explained to Guts and Gibbon, since we had an ongoing debate on this issue, which I think she's tapped out on. This really is preclusionary data, guys. Preclusionary data. Evolution can't be true. Sperm competition doesn't work. Faster rates of substitution doesn't work. It really doesn't. It's a big issue. So if you want to say humans, chimps, and bonobos are related, you're going to have to explain both gene loss and gene addition. Chimpanzee and bonobos related, but not with humans, just a little bit of gene loss, which can happen since the flood with mutation accumulation, environment, mating habits, sperm competition. Bring in the humans, you need gene addition. Not going to happen. And the differences are too massive. Again, less than 30%. 30%. Then you've got gorillas as their own created kind. Just have a look at their Y chromosome. And then your orangutans go back to their own archetype. So what we actually know about Y chromosome data fits creationist expectations. This is from one of their papers in 2020. Look at this amazing support right out of their own mouths for special creation. Despite a recent divergence, so they assumed that there was a divergence of these species about 7 million years ago, their Y chromosomes differ enormously in size and gene content. In sharp contrast to the stability of the rest of the genome, for example, the chimpanzee Y, so here we go, it's only half the size of the human Y. So right off the bat, you're just comparing half. And the percentage of gene families shared between these two chromosomes that split 6 million years ago, notice this, is similar to that shared by human and chicken autosomes that split 310 million years ago. Chicken and humans, This is how surprised they were. These are the differences that they found. Puzzlingly, in terms of shared genes and overall architecture, the human Y is more similar to the gorilla Y than to the chimpanzee Y. What does that mean? That's a break in their expected nested hierarchy, where humans and chimps should be more similar to each other than gorillas, orangutans, gibbons, so on and so forth. There's a break in the hierarchy. And just like their rescue devices with anything, okay, ERVs, that's a topic for another day. Mutation rates, diversity. With the Y chromosome, it's story time. So give them a thumbs up. It's just more story time for the evolutionist. Okay. I actually managed to get through all of those slides. And all right, that was a lot of fun. Got through the main points, and let's just check the questions. And I think we're good. There's just one here. So super chat, Rosina, $10 super chat. Why do we see people in the past speaking different languages, having vastly different cultures? They should speak different languages, but have the same culture under the Tower of Babel. Well, that's what we see. Even I think it was Stephen Jay Gould may have pointed to the reality that, yeah, it makes sense that at one point there was one universal language that eventually was broken up into other different lineages. So, okay, guys. Well, we went about 3.5 hours. Matt Powell did a great job. Matt Nailor did a great job. We wanted this to be a comprehensive dismantling of evolution and a thorough confirmation of creation. So, guys, I appreciate you all tuning in, and we're going to do more of these as we move into 2025. That is for sure. God bless you all. Standing for Truth is out.